Am I live? Yeah, I'm live. Okay, sorry guys. I am always late. I keep pushing the timeout that I put it up to, and then and then I'm like, oh, I can't do it until I'm like totally ready. 'Cause I'm a little coward. But what's up? What's up, Mike Oxlong? I've seen your name before. Is that just on YouTube or are you in the Discord with that name? But yeah, let's get started. Oops. Okay, so we're gonna be doing what if alt his today. If you're watching this and you're watching it not live, then I hope I catch you on another live stream because I really enjoy interacting with everybody that joins. That's my favorite part of this. And if you are watching, I'm going to put markers in the description so you can click at a certain point because I'm not going to start for a second. I'm going to drop the link in the Twitter. So there'll be a marker probably 5, 6 minutes in while I wait for people to trickle in. And it said there were 5 people, and now it says one. Is it just yeah, just YouTube. Okay, sweet. YouTube lurker. Well, I appreciate you coming out and saying something. I hope that I've provided some sort of value to you. That's the goal. A lot of these live streams are great because I get ideas for new content. And I get to interact with people, which I really enjoy. Spend a lot of time just working in an office, so it's nice to talk to people. So these kind of energize me a little bit for more in-depth work. And then I get more comfortable on camera. Yeah, that's one of the things. Doing a lot more of this. So, yeah. But people seem to like them, and it gives me a chance because a lot of the stuff that I make, it just takes so long to research that it's nice to have content that I can do that doesn't require so much setup and everything. Yeah, anyone else in the chat? I'm just gonna drop the link in the Discord. It's ours analytics screen. Where is that? Where are we at? Okay. What's up, T-Rex? How you doing, brother? Good to see you. You guys like the new background, or is this not good? Maybe I should make this part larger. Yeah, let's do that. That's nice. It's still behind me, so okay. Sick. All right, so again, just a few more minutes until I'm going to start. I just let a few people trickle in, and I got to drop the link on Twitter. I always forget about Twitter. If you're watching live on Twitter, this is fine to watch there as well. But if you want to comment, which I love when people do that, then join on the YouTube, and also please like the video. I would appreciate that. Okay, so I'm going to take this link. I'm so ADHD; it helps me to just say what I'm doing while I'm doing it, which is great for streaming reactions. Um, so I'm going to go to Twitter and I'm going to not get distracted like I just did. And I'm going to post a comment below the YouTube. Oh, there's 5 people watching on Twitter. Always. Okay. So, uh, okay. I have a larger following on Twitter than YouTube. So whenever I always stream onto Twitter and then I just tell people, hey, like join the YouTube. That's where it is. He debated Vaush. Why would anyone even interact with Vaush? Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. So that video is like on Vaush's page, and I haven't seen that, but Vaush also put out another clip of like, oh, what if alt hist coping about Vaush? Yeah, I hope I'm not going to get involved in that type of drama as I become larger. I try not to insult people. Um, I do when I'm doing these reactions, I have to catch myself because I realize that like these are real people who will likely, I mean, if I'm successful with what I'm doing, like if I do what I'm trying to do, which is get more views on videos, then they're going to see it. So it's like, it's a different thing because you're so used to talking shit on the couch with my friends, which is like kind of what this feels like to me, except in like a different, internet form. Um and you can say things that you maybe don't even really mean about people if they're like, if they're not real in the sense that they're on the screen, but they are real people and they might hear it, and that's a different thing. Okay. I dropped it on there. My branding. Drop a banner. Like the video, please. The video has 4 likes. There's 9 people here. Hello, friends. I think we can start now. So this is what I'm gonna do. I got a bunch from the Discord. Hop in there if you haven't already. A bunch that people wanted to see, but we're gonna start with understanding Latin America, and then I'm gonna go on to the debate. Well, no, I'm not. Well, maybe we'll do the debate in parts because that's gonna be a lot to take in with Vaush. I'll make that up to you guys, but we'll do the Vaush debate after we do two of these shorter What If Alt His videos. So I'm looking at 12 Insane Wars and debate on social justice versus Vaush. Debating Vaush on social justice is crazy. That's absolutely crazy. But yep. Let's go. I need to okay. So I'm gonna start this What If Alt His video. So I'm gonna Cleveland video 1. That's the cut spot. And I should probably just do that while I'm doing it. Okay, so the time to start is like 5:48. And let me know, just confirm with me when it starts that the audio is okay in the comments. I would appreciate that. And here we go. Understanding Latin America with What If Alt Hist.
Wealthy or powerful enough to be Europe or the US, it hasn't seen Asia's dynamic growth, and it's not as war-ridden or desperately poor as Africa is. This means that Latin America generally gets left behind in books on politics or history. I can't tell you how many politics books I've read that just look at Asia and Europe and the US, or history books that just cover the Spanish conquest of the Aztecs and Incas and then promptly forget the region existed at all. People from the Eastern Hemisphere generally forget Latin America or view it as quaint, while Canadians and Americans often look upon it with a combination of horror and condescension. This video is my attempt to explain how Latin America works. It'll look at how Latin America formed, how it's progressed, and where it's going. Let's look.
Okay, so how Latin America formed, how it's progressing. And yeah, this is exactly the type of stuff I want to be doing. So I'm glad I picked this one first. This is some cultural anthropology stuff.
At one of the most enigmatic and confusing parts of the world, a region of dazzling diversity and color stretching from Miami to the Arctic.
Okay. How does Latin America work?
Civilizations take millennia to build and have a great deal of struggle and adventure that go into them. Experience some of that with Rise of Kingdoms, a mobile strategy game where you build a civilization.
Not today.
In the first video in this series in which I talked about Western civilization, I left Latin America out of that video, which turned out to be a controversial decision in which people keep on asking me why I made that call. The truth is, I don't know or care if Latin America is part of Western civilization. It's sort of like, is turquoise a shade of green or blue? I'm sure some person has a definite answer to that question somewhere, but the only thing I can tell you is that the colors green and blue exist, and there's an area in between that's also a color, and I don't think arguing over whether or not it's blue or green is worthwhile. Latin America does have certain aspects of Western civilization and certain that don't fit, but
okay, so Latin America, like aspects of Western civilization, it just depends on how you define Western civilization, because like depending on the country, it is sort of a spectrum. But the governments of these countries, like while a lot of the people, and more so in certain countries than others, might be indigenous or African to certain extents, the governments themselves were created by mostly white Europeans. And like they had this thing called the encomienda system, which I assume he's going to talk about. But like, I don't know, he's not really getting at the point here.
I find arguing over
opinion.
definitions takes away from actually looking at things for what they really are by.
Okay, so that's a good point, though. Just if you don't even have to define it, let's just look at the details and let's not say it's Western or not. Let's just say what it is.
Shoving them into pre-existing frameworks. The point I was trying to make is that Latin America is complex and different enough from the rest of Western civilization that deserves
What
a
if
video
alt
in of
fist?
itself.
Oh no.
The US operates similarly enough to Germany that you could use the same basic operating system on both. Meanwhile, you would need to code a completely different expansion pack in order to model how, say, Colombia works. Some of you might say Argentina or Uruguay are similar enough to what.
Okay, I mean, but like native peoples, we have those in the US. Juntas, I mean, we have them under different names. Like, what's the definition of that? That's a military government, I guess. I guess we don't have those, but regular hyperinflation. That doesn't. What about Greece? That doesn't mean it's not Western. Rolling political factions. That's very Western.
Okay. How, say, Colombia works.
I don't necessarily think these are distinctions. I think he's concentrating on the details of this rather than like saying that the details in the Latin American thing are different from the West in a non-arbitrary way, but I'm not sure that's true.
Some of you might say Argentina or Uruguay are similar enough to what southern Italy would be like as an independent country, or Portugal, and that's probably fair, but for convenience
Well,
sake,
yeah,
we're
and
going to look at
they're
them through the
Iberian.
prism of
So there's differences between different parts of the West. The differences between the Nordic countries and France is pretty severe. And there's overlap, but you know,
Latin America in this video. An interesting thing is the Philippines could reasonably be considered a cultural part of Latin America, given that it was colonized by the Spanish for centuries during
Latin America. That's another important part of it.
the same era as Latin America. I mean, the Philippines are named after the 16th century King Philip of Spain, for Christ's sake. Similarly, the native peoples were tribal farmers at a similar level of development to roughly Colombia. I could probably make a fascinating video using the Philippines to understand Latin America, but the Philippines is sadly one of the areas of the world where I know the least history.
Okay, just because they both have Spanish influence and were even at the same time, it's not Latin America. Latin America specifically is also the blend with the indigenous people there, which had their own culture. Whereas the Philippines is a blend of Spanish culture with the indigenous people in the Philippines, which is a completely different group of people. I mean, they're actually both rooted in Asian subcultures, but they're divided by tens of thousands of years. So I don't. That's annoying that he's saying Latin America. He's not concentrating on the America part or mentioning the indigenous people, which you guys know. I want to talk about that.
About. There are generally three continental cultural influences in Latin America: the Iberian in the form of the Spanish and Portuguese, the African and native populations. Every Latin American country has these influences to differing degrees, with some nearly entirely missing out in the native or African influence, but with Iberian culture being the shared characteristic.
Yeah, he's
How
mostly
these
right
formed
here.
is the topic of the next part of this video.
People don't really realize we talk about race in the West, like especially in I should say North America, as like black and white and Hispanic being its own category, but like Messi is a white man, and most people in Argentina are white. It's whiter than the United States. And like then you go to other countries like Ecuador or Peru, and most of the people there are indigenous. But a lot of the people, especially the people that are pretty um that are like in power, are descendants of white people. Which look, that's just what it is. That's how it works, and it's an extension of the encomienda system. But most Americans, Canadians, they don't know about it, especially Europeans. Why would they?
The Spanish conquest of the New World was really impressive in sheer military terms. In many cases, like Pizarro's conquest of the Inca, 200 or so Spaniards, with the overlooked help of native allies, were able to conquer an empire of 11 million people. Around 600 Spaniards under Cortes were able to conquer the Aztec Empire, which had roughly the same population as France's of downwards of 20 million people, and whose capital at
They had higher carrying capacity for populations with roughly like they're different technological tracks really because they didn't have a lot of draft animals. Although they did have llamas, but other differences, especially with the Incas being up in the mountains, they are a very, very unique civilization. I wish we had more about them, but even what we do have is very interesting.
Tenochtitlan would be the second biggest city in Europe. A couple things allowed this, the first of which is the obvious technological advantages. Much to many people's
Right,
surprise,
dominance.
the biggest Spanish advantages weren't with guns, but with steel and especially horses, which the native fighting styles were in no way
The Incan conquest, very clearly the Spanish essentially tricked the Incans. And the details of that are very interesting and long, but yeah, shout out Alaric the Barbarian. He's been doing a lot of stuff on the what are the freaking conquistadors.
adapted for. However, another very important factor was that these native regimes were often really brutal and disliked. Although later Latin American nationalist historians have tried to rehabilitate them, the Aztec Empire, for example, was really hated since it was the New World equivalent of Assyria, which used immense brutality to hold down its subject
Oh,
peoples. In the
okay. So I don't know where I got that idea from. I didn't really think it was that unique of an idea, but I've said that before, but I didn't know that he had said that unless I just forgot. That's basically like stealing his thing if I didn't. But yeah, the wait, you're right. The Aztecs were like Assyria. I thought he was calling the Incans. The Incans weren't really like that. The Incans were closer to communism in a lot of ways. It's really there's comparisons to be made there, and some of them are like Marxist opinions, but in a lot of ways, there was a lot of communists, including the authoritarianism. But I digress.
Inca, although being generally fairly benevolent, expanded too quickly and were already suffering crippling civil wars when the Spanish arrived. The Spanish native allies often numbered 90% of their manpower. Similarly, disease was probably the biggest factor, killing 90% of the native population, which had no immunity to European diseases within a century of European arrival. One of the things you need to understand at the Spanish colonization of Latin America was that it was in many ways an extension of the Reconquista, or the process by which the North Christian Spanish kingdoms colonized the South Muslim ones. It's a little ironic that the
Hell
last
yeah,
Muslim
brother.
kingdom in Spain was crushed in the same year as the discovery of the New World by
Nope. Very intentional. When you finish fighting a war that lasted for 700 years, you have some time, energy, and resources to do something else. And they are absolutely, even in the historical record, connected.
Columbus. This manifests in a bunch of ways. First of all, for a lot of the wars with the Muslims, the Spanish would gather local ambitious militias together to conquer the Muslim cities without much guidance from the centralized government. These enterprising captains would turn power over to the central Castilian monarchy in exchange for titles of nobility. This was exactly the way in which the Spanish colonized the New World, with the conquistadors acting out of their own free will and acting like private business endeavors. The central Castilian government accumulated.
Yeah, so this idea, and this is an early modern thing, this is like early capitalism. So there is something very dangerous about people who they have an incentive, a financial incentive to it's decentralized. So the crown has decentralized what they need to get done because the reward for what they're doing is so great that the crown doesn't have to organize their own thing. It's basically like having like, and this is what a privateer is. It's basically like having subcontractors. But when the incentive, when the subcontractors can make a lot of money by being incredibly cruel, that creates a lot of these systems. And I've talked about that a number of times, how a lot of the cruelty, even from Columbus, has to do with people being in debt, needing to pay back debtors. And this has a lot to do with why I think that usury is ultimately a very bad thing. But we'll get more into that later on. If you want to hear stuff like that, please subscribe and like the video.
This massive New World empire without real effort on their part. It's sort of like if Elon Musk colonized Mars with SpaceX and used his own money and then turns it over to the US government. The largest way the Reconquista played into the creation of Latin America was sheerly through the immense energy and conviction that was done with. While most of Europe was in the Renaissance era of humanism, of painting naked people and borderline atheism, Spain was still hardcore crusader. The reason people like Cortez or Pizarro
that's what happens
didn't
when you
declare
fight a
themselves
religious war for
independent
700
kings
years.
upon conquering their massive empires was that there was immense belief in the mission of a united Spain that came from the centuries-long conflict with the Muslims. The Spanish did best in the pre-existingly developed kingdoms in the New World like the Aztecs or Inca. These empires were similar to those of the Bronze Age in the Old World, with highly centralized god-king structures. The Inca Empire, for example, was one of the very few successful communist states in history, with no private property, everyone being assigned jobs, and the state even assigning.
Yes, it comes out very communist, but you really can't call it communism because it's its own distinct thing. Like, it's not communism in the sense of Marxism, but it is pretty fair. It falls really right into communism. It's actually pretty interesting.
Rides. The centralized kingdoms provided a central nexus that the Spaniards could easily base their power out of. For example, in Peru, the Spaniards easily first enslaved and then serfed the native population. They just used the governmental structures set up by the Inca to oppress the native peasantry even more. In many circumstances, the Spanish used the native aristocracies, who they recognized as legitimate nobility, to govern their empires.
Yeah, so this is another decentralized leadership technique, and it's what the Spanish at this point started doing pretty well. And the British Empire was largely a very bureaucratic empire and decentralized. And that's why they were able to take over India, because they were ruling over the more local aristocratic rulers. Yeah, decentralized is very good. There's got to be incentives for people to take actions. I mean, that's human nature.
Existing Indian nobility at a really high rate in order to maintain their local legitimacy. All of this meant that the centers of Spanish America were also the native centers, and thus Mexico and Peru. It's often shocking that the Spaniards were able to control such massive realms so outnumbered.
Yeah, look, Howard Zinn, People's History of the U.S., it's trash. It's a trash book. It's garbage. It's part of why I know that I can do this, because like the stuff that comes out of like regular academia, Howard Zinn, that book is from like 1984 or like 1980s or whatever. But today, like the stuff that's coming out of academia today, like that article I put on Twitter where they were arguing exercise science being, look, that was nonsense. It's on my Twitter. It's my pinned tweet if you want to check that out. But it's garbage. So it's very easy for someone like me of semi-intelligence to come in and debunk their stupid ideas by actually reading into them, which is an incentive. And there's money to be made in it. Howard Zinn was lame AF. Had to read that in first year of college. Yeah, seriously, it's bad. It's just bad. I was reading it like this is uh, whatever. It's bad. Check out Nordhugger. He's got some great content similar to mine.
But you have to remember that the Spanish annihilated the pre-existing cultural leadership by wiping out the indigenous priest classes, who were the teachers, historians, bankers, and community leaders of these societies.
Essentially destroyed the entire culture. Essentially.
Similarly, the Spanish argument was that their god was superior, and that was very heavily backed by the natives dying at 90% rates to disease.
I mean, look, if you're religious people and before like modern technology and you don't understand diseases very well or at all, and you come in and you go to a place and immediately like a place where they're sacrificing people at the top of a monument and you're religious zealots because you've been fighting a war for 700 years and then people just start dying and like all of them start dying, they're the most logical like what's it called, end to that. There's a better word for that, there's a gooder word for that, but the most logical conclusion from that is that God is on your side. I mean, effectively God is a conception. If you want to take a historical conception of the concept of God was on their side in the sense that the tide of history put them in the position to take that over. And you know, God, call it what you want, but that's a force outside their control ultimately.
With their belief in their own cultures and leadership neutered, the Indians of the urban societies in the New World became quite subservient subjects of the Spanish crown. The non-profitable areas were generally colonized by the church. Conquistadors wanted to become lords with serfs, but lost interest in the areas where that got difficult. The fathers just wanted converts, and it was nice if they got serfs as well, but that wasn't strictly necessary. On the mosquito-ravaged coasts of Venezuela, the deserts of Texas or California, or the grasslands of Paraguay, Spanish civilization was largely brought by the church. Brazil and Argentina are largely the exceptions to this. In Brazil, which we'll investigate in more detail, the Portuguese started using it as a way station to sail on their way to the Indian Ocean. Both Argentina and Brazil were settler societies in the mold of the US and Canada, inhabited either by African slaves or white settlers with little Indian influence. The Spanish crown had a social structure with three main power centers with one supreme over the rest, those being the landlords, church, and crown. The landowners were largely the descendants of the conquistadors. In most Latin American countries until around the 1970s, around 12 to 15 families controlled the majority of all the lands and thus large parts of the economy. The Spanish crown gave massive tracts of land to a new nobility with serfs in exchange for converting them to Christianity.
Look, people talk about this. Serfs are slaves. They're slaves. They're just enslaved to the land. They don't have freedom of mobility. They don't have freedom of their bodies. There are not laws to protect them. Serfs are slaves. It's just a distinction of them being enslaved to the land rather than to a specific person.
The church given lots of land and tremendous
But they're enslaved to the land, and then a person owns the land, so they own the people.
Amounts of power by a very Catholic society that had just defeated the Muslims became a huge force in Spanish America. It was basically the cultural nexus that provided the basic welfare, education, art, banking, leadership, and investment of the Spanish Empire. The church was the most stable organization in society and was also the thing that the Indians trusted the most. Although the Spanish American church was often brutal and racist, in comparison to the landlords who wanted to enslave the native population, the church stood up for the rights of the Indians and basic human decency. The crown was the most powerful element in Spanish American society, which was deeply surprising given that the empire was so fucking huge. It would take nearly half a year for orders from the crown to reach a place like Bogota in Colombia, and even longer to reach Manila in the Philippines. Something that's very key to understand at the Spanish Empire is that they were clearly consciously trying to model the Romans. A mistake I read about in a lot of colonial histories is that they view the Spanish colonial officials as idiotic thugs who were purposely trying to impoverish their subjects. That's not accurate. The Spanish officials were actually
in especially North American histories and English language in general histories, there is a strong anti-Catholic sentiment, and historically, and this goes back all the way to the Ku Klux Klan and prior to that, because America, people call it a Christian country. It really is a Protestant country. It hasn't been. The Catholics have basically been in this country since like 150 years ago, 100 years ago in any serious numbers. So there is a bias against Catholics, and there's also a bias against the Spanish, which we imported from the English, as we are also an Anglo descended country. So people don't like to recognize this, but if you become aware of it, you will notice it now that there's an anti-Catholic and an anti-Spanish built into our history.
Remarkably well-educated and intelligent, studying Roman law and Greek
Yeah.
philosophy at some of the best universities in the world, but their understanding of the world is very different than ours. The Spanish were the last of the old-school empires in Europe. What I mean by that is that before the modern world, most empires were not economically based. Instead, they tried to control their societies through hierarchy. They tried to maintain religious homogeneity in order to maintain social cohesion, centralize power as much as possible in order to maximize their power, try to control trade to support their social hierarchies, and build societies as cohesive, supposedly symbiotic hierarchies rather than maximizing freedom. They all trusted that educated gentlemen and nobilities would manage a state better than a bunch of rabble. As of the 16th century, this is how every successful empire.
Okay. Let's just back that up for a second.
Rather than power as much as possible in order to maximize their power, try to control trade to support their social hierarchies, and build societies as cohesive, supposedly symbiotic hierarchies rather than maximizing
supposedly symbiotic hierarchies?
Freedom. They all trusted that educated gentlemen and nobilities would manage a state better than a bunch of rabble.
Yeah, they did manage them better. Are you serious? I mean, are you seeing what's going on in the West in the last 400 years? This guy's a supposed conservative, and he's out here like he's just a neocon, which is to say he's a liberal. He's not a conservative. That bothers me. Supposedly symbiotic or aristocratic relationships. These supposedly systematic. They were extraordinarily systematic. All of the look at the big picture, the big result of everything. Absolutely, these countries were run better than our countries, our liberal democracies today. They're run like crap. They have no long-term anything. No one's held accountable. Nobody, they're not serving in the military anymore. They all served in the military. They sacrificed. Like, dude, the aristocrats, did you understand? Like, in every war ever, there's always been, like, lieutenants, which are company grade officers, lieutenants and captains. They have the highest casualty rate of anyone in the army. They just always do. Anyone in the military, that class, more than the enlisted, more than the higher officers, they're always dying. Those are the aristocrats. They always have been. They forever, while this was happening, it was a system that actually promoted people to sacrifice and be involved in the state. There were real systems of patronage, #patronage, shout out bog beef, where people were expected. And because they were expected, because there was real social pressure that these guys want to just discount, because anything that's like that's any sort of abstract or any sort of esoteric, they just view as nonsense because they think in stupid numbers that their dumbass college went to that has its credibility through like rich people rather than actually promoting something good. For forever, they were still learning Latin and shit. We had an aristocracy in the US until the early 1900s. I digress. Listen. The point is, he's wrong. He's not a conservative. Aristocracy is good, and it clearly worked better than the shit we have now. Clearly. I mean, look around you. Just go outside. I don't care where you live, unless you live somewhere in the total woods. Like, you can't go 5 miles without seeing some third world bullshit basically anywhere in America at this point. So what the hell are you talking about? All right. Let's keep going.
As of the 16th century, this is how every successful empire in a European gentleman's collective consciousness had been maintained across history, whether the Romans, Persians, Chinese, etc. However, starting right after the Spanish Empire formed, new forms of empire were created, those based on financial rather than hierarchical power. People were encouraged to work for the emperor superior telling them to do so. Starting with the Dutch and the British, and then taking in the French and reaching an apex with the Americans, empires became structured to maximize outputs and freedom of action so that the society could become as efficient and powerful as possible. I once read a book written in the 1940s saying that Mexico was poor and America rich since the Spanish thought one became wealthy by controlling gold and the English thought it was by making stuff. These market-oriented societies absolutely wrecked hierarchy-based empires like the Spanish, Ottomans, Chinese, etc. as time passed.
Let's hear that again.
Wealthy by controlling gold and the English thought it was by making stuff. These market-oriented societies absolutely wrecked hierarchy.
Yeah, because it was, it was decentralized. So that's a big bonus.
Based empires like the Spanish, Ottomans, Chinese, etc. as time passed. Saying this will prevent me from ever visiting Spain, but it's really more useful to the Spanish Empire as a midpoint between a Muslim empire like, say, the Ottomans, and a country like France. That honestly does make sense, given that the most civilized and developed parts of Spain, and the parts most involved in the colonization of the New World were heavily culturally Arab and Muslim not that long before the colonization of the New World started. The Spanish imperial model was basically exactly the same as the Ottoman, with a colonial warrior noble class ruling over.
Yeah, so actually, I'm going to stop this right here. So, a good officer that came from one of the 3 big military academies. The military academies now, I was in the Marine Corps, so I have a little bit of experience with this, but I was enlisted. I was a lowly corporal, but they the military academies now are basically networking. It's hard to advance if you're not in that. Most of the general officers come from there, and now they're being selected in similar ways for other colleges in the US. So the officer class of the US is being infested essentially in a lot of ways. And that's all I'll say about it, because I don't want to talk too much because I'm not too in tune with it, but that is my perspective. Aristocracies shifted as capitalism grew. What the hierarchies valued shifted but did not disappear. Yes. Okay. So this is a really good point, because aristocracies did shift. So I think in a lot of ways we still do have an aristocracy, a lot of time hidden, especially because capitalism allows them to hide. So I've talked about this before, but a slave, if you have a slave, you have one human output. You have the output of one human being. All things held equal, you have 3 human individuals. You tax them at 1/3 rate. From an accounting perspective, you have 1 slave if you have 3 taxpayers. So it's another one of these decentralized things. But let's go.
For the empire, with a unified crusading religion as the source of political legitimacy and a large centralized absolutist monarchy. The native populations were stripped of leadership, while the market economy and science were distrusted, and attacks on religious authority brutally crushed. But back to the main point that I teased. The Spanish were trying very hard to model the Roman Empire and succeeded in a lot of ways. The biggest similarity is that both used culturally coherent aristocracies to dominate diverse and
culturally coherent aristocracies. What a great phrase.
Large regions. A Quechua Indian peasant in the Peruvian Andes shared nothing with a cowboy in Argentina or a Congo-speaking slave in Cuba, but their landlords shared a culture that became Latin America. A wealthy person from Mexico City could immigrate more than 1,000 miles to Lima and experience the exact same culture. This was very different from the British colonies, in which a trip 500 miles north from Baltimore to Boston would take one in an entirely different economic, social, religious model. Until the Revolution, the British colonies distrusted each other more than their mother country. The Spanish were...
Yeah, so this is something people forget. You know, the identity is what identity is important shifts over time. Today, very important. Race is very important. Wasn't always as important. Your allegiance to your colony, or in the case of New England, specifically to New England, because New England was an entity of its own at certain points. New England Confederation, New England Dominion. So it does matter. It does matter what identity you have.
We're trying very hard to imitate the Roman Empire of around 100 AD at its height, but instead ended up pretty similarly to how the Roman Empire worked around 400 with Diocletian in its decline. In both of these states, the centralized government was trying too hard to maintain more power over a region than really made sense. Both states were trying to get Stalin levels of control over their countries when transportation was being done by mule. This resulted in sclerotic bureaucracies which passed lots of legislation that they really couldn't enforce. The Spanish crown sent around 500,000 edicts to America during the colonial era, most of which were irrelevant, didn't work with local conditions, and then ended up being condensed around 7,000 laws that made sense. Spanish America had really complex legal codes, which were in fact so complicated that they were only enforced in the breach rather than to the letter, since that would have just been impossible. This is effects even today, with Latin America known for being one of the most bureaucratic and red tape-based parts of the world, which hurts business terribly. The Spanish crown would send viceroys to the disparate parts of the empire and have them rule like kings for a couple years. In order to prevent the provinces from becoming too independent of the Spanish crown, none of the top positions were allowed to native-born whites, with those top positions being controlled by Spaniards from Spain itself. The second someone was born in America, they became a literal second-class citizen. The Spaniards created
just so we're clear, second-class citizen in a system that had like 12 classes. So the fully white born were like number 2 to the Peninsulares, who were actually born on the peninsula in Spain or Portugal.
System of forced labor and servitude in which Indians and blacks had to work for Spanish nobility. This was pretty similar to Diocletian's Rome, in which a government-based serf economy resulted in profound inequality, a strangling of the market economy, and declining population growth, as so much was extracted from the population that there weren't enough resources for people to have lots of kids. Spanish America expanded really quickly and then...
I actually don't know about this, T-Rex. Maybe. I wouldn't be able to say one way or the other. But I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, you're going to send your kid halfway across the world? You might do it if it's good for career advancement, but I'm not sure it was.
Faced economic and demographic decay. The borders of Spanish America were roughly the same in 1590 as 1790, and the population of Mexico in 1700 was 4.5 million, or a quarter of what it was under the Aztecs. For example, the little more than 1 million or so people who immigrated to America in the colonial era bred like crazy and had a population of 10 million in 1820. A key point is that Spanish America, like Spain before it, was an urban civilization, unlike British North America that was rural. A couple Spanish landlords would live in the city, extracting resources from the white, black, or native serfs around them. Speaking to other elites, well, they shared practically nothing with their serfs, and so the society itself was fairly weak. Something you really need to understand about Latin America is that it, alongside India...
Okay, so this right here is, this is the encomienda system shown. I'm just gonna... I really enjoy this. So this right here, the first 4 are not shown. So a mulatto, which is half white, half black, with an Española, which is, I guess that's the second one, like a fully white. That's a Morisco. And a Morisco, which is now a quarter black person. Then they're number 6. Number 7 is a Chino, which is this, which is like with an Indian. So you see the difference. It's like, it's combinations of white and black. The combinations of white and Indian, which is indigenous, are up here. They're not shown. And then these ones are now mixes of first white and black, of varying of decaying amounts of white. And then down here are blacks mixed with Indians. And at the bottom is like a part. This is a mostly black person, and then pure black people at the bottom. So this is like, yes, the Indians in this case are like 3rd-class citizens, but then black people are 4th-class citizens. So not only, what I find really interesting about this is that not only is there a distinction between the whites and the Native Americans, but then in the racial hierarchy, for whatever reason, the Spanish recognize blacks as lower down than the Indians. And I haven't looked into it too much, and some of it's in Spanish, and my Spanish isn't good enough for academic work. But it's really interesting to me, and I would love to know if there was a justification in a certain way, like how they specifically justified it, if they wrote about that. But yeah, that's the encomienda system.
Are the most multiracial and also ethnically diverse of the main civilizations. In Latin America, a white ruling class installed itself, and then a complex caste system developed with different ethnicities performing different roles in the society. In Venezuela,
what this also does is disincentivizes race mixing. It allows it officially because it has this option, but it disincentivizes it in the sense that it makes it less likely. So there's less of it. So they make it happen less, but it still exists. And this helps them to protect their power. Same thing with the caste system in India.
Venezuela, for example, the Castilian Spanish were the ruling class. The native-born whites controlled a lot of the economic power. People from the Canary Islands were the merchants and artisans. The herders were mixed-race white, black, native. Blacks worked in the plantations, and either mixed-race or full-blood natives were serfs. I think the most important element for a society's success is social cohesion, and that people trust that the other elements of the society are trying their best, that the rulers aren't cheating the people, and other groups aren't free-riding. Japan and America are both very successful societies that share practically nothing in common except social cohesion. Latin America, meanwhile, is one of the regions in the world that scores lowest on this metric, with Latin Americans not trusting their governments or even neighbors at all. This was accentuated by having different races living together, providing different roles, while having a literal parasitic ruling class and a docile peasant class completely alienated from the modern world. This will have profound effects on the society that we'll discuss later. A big factor for Latin America is the peasantry and lower classes were basically not represented at all in the social structure. There was no system of accountability and feedback loop between the lower and upper classes, which turned Latin America into a profoundly aristocratic society. I was once reading a book written in the 1940s which said that your average mid-level Brazilian city would have an opera house and no functioning sewer system, and your average American city would be the opposite. Brazil's sort of a weird twisted mirror to all of this, where the Portuguese government was way more lax than the Spanish, but it did have a lot of similar policies. The Portuguese government banned the printing press, set up massive aristocratic plantations where people brought slaves in to create a complex white-black caste system. At the same time, the Portuguese didn't have as strong a hand as the Spanish did, but you see similar aristocratic results appearing in Brazil as in the rest of Latin America. A lot of this just comes from the economics of sugar slavery, which creates similar results to what happened in Latin America. I mean, look at the Roman Empire, which, as it got higher and higher percentages of slaves, became more similar to how Latin America developed. Two of the most brutal things I ever read in history books were both about Mexican history. The first was Mexico is one of the few nations that when it was born,
I got coffee. I'll be back in 5 minutes. I forgot about my coffee. Give me 5 minutes. So if you need to use the bathroom and you're worried about missing any of this, which you shouldn't be, then now's your time. I hope everybody doesn't leave, but I guess we'll test and see if this works. Because if I'm going to be doing long ass streams, I'm gonna have to do. Okay, I'm gonna go get the call. Wow, I left and more people joined. That's crazy. Okay. Gosh, I need to get new glasses. Place my contacts. So what's everyone up to this week? Sometimes I click on them just so I can read them. This needs Monty Python. I actually can put music on. Okay. Thanks, guys. All right, where is JC at? He'll hop in here eventually. He always does. Somebody check on that.
Tell if it was an abortion or not. And the other was Mexico as an epilogue to the Spanish Empire. Confused? Let me explain. As I tried to explain before, the Spanish government set up Latin America in order for them to administer it directly, and so that the colonies could not act independently. This meant that when the Spanish colonies did get independence, they continually floundered about and failed to act independently of the Spanish crown. When Spain was invaded by France during the Napoleonic Wars around 1810, each of the Spanish-American colonies collapsed into what amounted to civil wars. People often talk about wars of liberation, but they were really normally just brutal race and class wars as the fabric of society fell apart with one local faction supporting the Spanish and the other independents. For example, about 25,000 people died in the American Revolution, while 400,000 died in the Mexican, but both countries had roughly similar populations. This was since the collapse of Spanish power resulted in a collapse in society in Mexico, while the collapse of British power in America was just normal business. Afterwards, the Latin American nations formed under caudillos or independent cults of personality as their government. These people would normally form factions to back them, often interestingly enough pulling from herding tribes as their followers, and then launch themselves into power for a few years until the next dictatorship would gain power. After a couple
As is
decades, the
tradition.
countries furthest from the equator pulled themselves out into coherent, centralized states, independent from these leaders' personalities. Latin America has always not been very stable, and so political fashions elsewhere manifest really strongly in Latin America, since the aristocratic culture allows cults of personality to manifest really strongly. Political fashions gain currency for a couple decades, allowing some Chad to gain power for him and his buddies, and then another fashion
Victor
sweeps over
Arb?
the region when he can't make real long-term change.
No, it's Mexico.
From 1850 to 1920-ish, republics of white landowners with voters rarely numbering over 10% of the population dominated the region. From 1920 to 1960, the area was dominated by dictatorial nationalist technocracies that were a weird mix of right and left-wing policies. Military dictatorships competed with communists and almost always won from 1960 to 1980. Liberal democracies gained power from 1980 to 2000, followed by a shift to left-wing governments until
that's just
around
too much
2016,
information, bro.
shifting back to further right governments. It would be an exaggeration to say these ideologies don't matter. The countries that supported neoliberalism ended up far better than those that went for communism, for example.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, but like, not that I'm a commie, obviously, but like part of that, and look, this is part of like real politics or whatever. I mean, this is the way it works. There's an element of the United States being right there and not letting the communists succeed. I don't know. Probably they wouldn't, but like maybe. Who knows?
But it wouldn't be a horrific exaggeration. For example, in both 1900 and today, the average Latin American had 1/4 the GDP of your average American. The region has been moving forward in the last few decades, forming a real middle class in large cities, for example, but the whole world has also been moving forward really fast, meaning that Latin America has been running very fast to stay in the same spot in relative power in the world stage as it's ever been. In fact, the rise of Eastern Europe and East Asia makes Latin America look downright pathetic and embarrassing. Latin America clearly has problems. Anyone, especially Latin Americans, realize that. They wouldn't be migrating to the US or Spain in the tens of millions if that wasn't the case. Countries like Brazil and Mexico have more annual gun deaths due to crime than deaths in actual war zones like Syria or Iraq. Many Latin American countries like Brazil or Venezuela are in the worst economic conditions in their entire recorded histories now, with millions of the global middle class slinking back into poverty. Why, however?
It's not good.
This is a question with really painful answers that people generally don't want to have be answered. The answers that get proposed are generally just demonstrative of what's self-aggrandizing. I will try my best to debunk some of the bad ones and try to propose some better answers. One of the arguments you hear coming out of the right is that there's something inherently wrong with Hispanic culture, that it's too collectivist, Catholic, etc. This is clearly false, given that firstly, Spain did quite well once it integrated into the European Union, and that Hispanics have done well inside the US. Miami, in real terms, is culturally part of Latin America.
Okay. I need to show you this. As an Anglo-American, I feel more at home in New Zealand than Miami. That is some cap-ass BS, dude. I don't even say cap, but I had to say it for this one. That is dumb as shit. I mean, I've been to New Zealand, I've been to Miami, and like, I don't know, dude. Maybe, but not really. Not at all. It's very different. They talk funny. They look weird. I don't know.
As is the Mexican borderland, and both are quite prosperous. Similarly, you still hear what amounts to the racist argument that Latin America isn't successful since
I just was asking where you were at, JC. That's so funny. What's up, brother? How you doing?
it's brown. This ignores the immense diversity in Latin America. Argentina and Uruguay are whiter than the US and Canada. There also really isn't a correlation for success and skin tone in Latin America. The Argentines in real terms are just as poor as their neighbors who are dark-skinned and are far worse off than mixed race.
No, it's within the own country, right? So like it's within a country, the whites in that country are more rich and powerful than the other ones. Just look at the Mexican government and then look at like Mexican people. And it's different by like province and everything too. The Mexican government is very European.
Chile. Among immigrant groups in America, the largely white Puerto Ricans are poorer than other darker-skinned groups like the Mexicans. You get the geography argument, which has some validity in that Latin America has had horrific diseases for a lot of its history.
No, okay, look, that's a dumb argument because he's comparing it between countries, and then he's saying like this country is mostly white and they're poorer than this other country. It's like there's so many other factors there. Like in Mexico, the whiter people have more money than the darker skinned people in Mexico. That is the thing. That's a fucking thing. Ask a Mexican.
massive deserts and jungles. However, you also get Latin American countries like Argentina that have what amounts to
They
a
had
perfect climate,
more
some of the
Italians
best soil
too.
in the world, and a big river system, and they still
Oh, yeah,
fail.
JC.
Also, America was able to get around the South's disease problems, the deserts of the West, and difficulty farming the Great Plains through technological advance. Latin America could have done something similar if it was a more technologically developed culture. You also hear the argument in the left that Latin America is held back by colonialism and a part of either Europe or America. On the surface level, this does make sense given how Latin America has been economically dependent on other regions, namely Britain before World War I and America since. However, upon scrutiny, it just doesn't hold up. Firstly, when you actually read the history involved, the local elites often welcomed colonial systems. Bolivar was practically simping for the British, for example. Latin America sells raw goods to the rest of the global market and in exchange gets produced goods. There isn't anything oppressive about it. All the partners are voluntary. Almost every economy ever has started with selling raw goods in exchange for produced ones with a more developed economy, but Latin America never progressed beyond it for centuries. The argument generally goes that if an American company would be mining copper in Bolivia, that it would be oppressing Bolivia, but if the Americans weren't there, the copper would never be mined in the first place, making everyone poorer. Similarly, studies have found that greater trade with America and Europe and China actually results in more wealth, not less. The drug trade is a critical exception to this, in which the massive desire for drugs coming out of the US destroyed practically every Latin country within 2,000 miles. However, to also be fair, if Latin America was already functioning, they'd be able to control the drug trade to a greater degree than they did. The British generally left Latin America alone politically, while the Americans launched a couple pinprick strikes in the Caribbean basin. The CIA gets way more credit than it deserves in Latin America. The destruction of leftists in places like El Salvador, Chile, and Argentina, for example, was almost entirely local.
So this is like 2 years ago. So it's before all the stuff going on in El Salvador right now. Right wing dictatorship taking over, making everything better. Not for the gang members, I guess, but everyone else.
Organized in the US just watched. The US does relatively little in Latin America, especially south of the Caribbean basin.
Yeah, look, this argument, I hate this argument, right? Because this argument is used to justify all this settler colonial stuff. And I'm not like I don't like necessarily think settler colonialism is bad, but I want to evaluate it based on its merits and how it is in actuality. I mean, I would say, in my opinion, that like doing it today, as it's done in certain places, is bad. In a historical sense, there's no judgment, there's no value judgment on it. That's not necessary to even consider. But it's the local elites selling out doesn't like it hurts the local people. So it's like there's this argument of like not that I want to get into it, but in Palestine, how like, oh, the Palestinians sold. It's like, no, the elites sold private land within a different place. It doesn't mean you can put a new country on it. Like if I wanted to, that's weird. If I wanted to like start my own country in my house, like it's not allowed, right? So it's just I don't give a lot of credence to that argument. Welcome. That's like saying U.S. politicians welcome the WEF, therefore everyone benefits from it. Yeah, JC, great analogy. That's exactly what it's like. CIA laughs in Northeast.
Since it just doesn't care, although it does pick factions it wants to win. The US did make some horrific and atrocious blunders, such as the 1952 coup in Guatemala that removed a democratic reforming government, and a 1916 invasion of the Dominican Republic, but there are other points where the US should have intervened and didn't. Haitians, for example, begrudged the US in the 1970s for not removing their tyrannical Papa Doc, and I'm betting most citizens in Cuba and Venezuela would have preferred the US to have a stronger hand. The US has more leniency in Latin America than many people care to admit. America, for example, let Mexico liquidate the American Oil Company in Mexico in the 1930s without raising a hand. America also wanted Castro and allowed him to seize power in his early phases for hope that he'd reform the country until he became communist and anti-American. The myth that their problems are due to foreign exploitation is very powerful in Latin America and does immense harm. Any failed Latin American dictator will just blame their problems on the US or the West to remove responsibility from themselves. Latin America has wasted literal decades blaming America on their poverty, which just mires them in further poverty. The idea that their poverty comes from exploitation
that's like a geopolitical way of saying pull yourself up by your bootstraps while we like destroy your entire country.
Is a way of reconciling that many Latin Americans are taught their nations are rich due to mineral wealth, but that they live poor lives. The truth, however, is that wealth has practically nothing to do with resources, as Switzerland and Japan being wealthy with practically nothing, and Nigeria and Brazil with massive resources being poor shows us. The truth is that Latin America is poor since there isn't a division between legal, political, and economic power. When the Iberian conquerors came in, they structured everything on an aristocratic basis. concentrating economic power in the hands of the landlords and judicial and political in the hands of the Spaniards who recently came over, who, when the Spanish monarchy fell apart, defaulted onto the landlords. This lack of balance of power has allowed a profound sense of corruption and distrust to permeate Latin America, since there just isn't any competition to behave better. Once power is centralized to this degree, anyone who really tries to change the system gets crushed behind the force of entropy and various weird special interests that don't want things to change. The powerful have no interest in not being corrupt, and so the system rots inside.
Yeah.
Revolutions have failed to reach their stated goals in Latin America.
But just a few minutes ago, he was talking about like the elite, like they're the ones who gave it up, right? So then he was. It's the opposite of his point, but whatever.
Since generally what happens is that the revolutionaries just fill the shoes of the pre-existing oppressors and change the names since it's so easy and profitable. The revolutions that claim to be wiping out the landlords frankly just became new landlords. It's interesting given that the American stereotype went from the lazy Mexican for when Mexicans were in Mexico to Mexicans being really hardworking and stealing American jobs in America. In Mexico, one wouldn't work hard since one wasn't incentivized to, since the landlord would just steal it. Rule of law is the main thing missing from Latin America, and that no one can trust that the law will behave properly, and so people can't be ambitious for fear that someone more powerful than them, whether a government official, local drug lord, or wealthy neighbor, might predate on them.
So that's the thing. There needs to be a monopoly on violence for people to feel safe, right? And this is what happened in El Salvador. The gangs they're going crazy. You don't know who's in charge. I mean, it was more the gangs than the government. Government cracks down, makes it very clear that they're the ones in charge by being brutal, but only to a certain subsection of the population, and they work it out. And unfortunately, and I'm not saying I'm not, defending dictatorship or whatever, but what happens is that it just seems, and this is, in my opinion, because of the situation getting out of control and it becoming necessary in the sense that this is what the people demand, and as such, this is what's going to happen. A dictatorship comes out of ambiguity when you don't know who's in charge of a region. This is very common. It's like, we destabilize these governments in the Middle East, and they're like, oh, we're going to make a liberal democracy, but they destabilize the country. They make it all like nobody knows who's in charge. And then they wonder why you can't slip into a liberal democracy. Every liberal democracy ever was born out of absolute power, not out of war. So this is how liberal democracies are made in actuality. Oh, look, Chinese weapons. I don't know what you're talking about.
Latin America's main issues really spring from the Iberian aristocrats' desire to totally control their societies, turning everyone else into docile serfs. For example, both the Spanish and Portuguese banned, with some exceptions, the printing press in their colonies and tightly controlled the flow of books and ideas. This is part of the reason why Latin America's educational system is so weak, which weakened equality and social mobility. The strongly economically unequal society meant that wealth never trickled downwards to have a capitalist revolution. Similarly, the Iberians discouraged economic innovation with bans on banks and local...
Yeah, this is one of those incentive things. It's like there wasn't an incentive in the government or in the system for people to move up in their social class, which used to be possible in America. It's not so much anymore. But there's no relation between hard work and succeeding in a way that is culturally relevant and that people want to do. So they weren't able to do it. Dictatorships are a response to social and economic conditions. Fully agree. They should be transitional governments. However, they rarely are. Yeah, I mean, they're transitional governments, but it just depends on what you're transitioning to, I guess. And it depends on how you define dictatorship, because you could define it as like a king, but then I would say that is a different thing than an actual dictatorship.
Trade between colonies. Latin America, as in all things, continued the precedent the Spanish set. Spain is a very interesting precedent, and in a lot of ways it was heavily isolated from the rest of Western civilization. Spain purposely missed out on the Enlightenment, scientific revolution, and Reformation. It's an interesting trend in anthropology that colonial societies...
So these are all Protestant things, right? So they were Catholic, so they didn't have these Protestant things of the Reformation and the other stuff he said.
Tend to be extreme versions of the societies they came from, and that's true for Latin America, which in some ways is a parody of the Spain of that era. Spain is also quite interesting economically in that when the North Spanish crown conquered the South in the Middle Ages, they They kicked out the productive local Muslim farming class in around the 13th century, replacing them with underpopulated ranch land. Similarly, the Spanish evicted their Jewish and Muslim merchant classes in the 15th century. The Muslim degree of development was higher than the Christian, and this resulted in economic stagnation as Spain became a highly aristocratic society. Spain in the 15th century was the poorest, least industrialized, and most unequal part of Western Europe, exchanging raw goods for produced ones from the Netherlands and Italy. Again, as we've seen, Latin America took this to an extreme. Interestingly enough, Latin America's lack of wars has been a major liability. Latin America has been consistently the most peaceful part of the world over the last 500 years. This is partially since the countries, for the most part, aren't organized enough to wage massive wars of conquest, but also since the borders here make too much sense. As the opposite of Africa, Latin America's borders make a lot of sense, with most countries being organized around a fertile heartland, with some sort of harsh terrain to demarcate a border with another country. The lack of war means that there isn't a great deal of competition between countries that would force them to improve. In a place like Europe, Latin American countries would be torn limb by Germany or France and would either have to reform or die, but no such desperation exists in Latin America, meaning the countries just keep on existing. If we look at the most successful countries in Latin America, such as Uruguay, Chile, and Costa Rica, they're all the regions that the Spanish government practically forgot about and didn't impose powerful hierarchies on. Hell, the Spanish didn't even acknowledge the existence of Costa Rica or Uruguay. Similarly, all those countries are generally pretty homogenous, with the rulers and ruled being the same ethnic group. More importantly, all these countries have had stable rule of law and democracy, which is what matters. In general, I would say not a lot, but I can figure a way out. The main vector through which Latin America could gain institutions is through proximity to the US. Tens of millions of Hispanics immigrated to America, and so the connections are strong and getting stronger. Similarly, American industry is relocated to Mexico to an immense degree, industrializing the northern part of the country. This is the only part of Latin America that's competitively industrialized. This is how societies become more successful almost every time, by proximity, often lasting centuries with other more successful societies. I'm not sure if this is going to work, yet it's the main way I can see Latin America pulling itself forward. Maybe some genius will be born who can bend the centuries of corruption and parochialism, but that sounds unlikely to me. Maybe wars will start ripping across the southern cone, forcing mass competition between nations, sparking progress, but I also don't find that likely. Latin America's way forward, in my opinion, is to have Cuba and Mexico industrialized due to American influence and have other Latin American countries try to copy them. Whatifalthist, and thanks for watching. If you enjoyed that video, please like, comment, subscribe, or stay tuned for additional content. Or alternatively, check me out at Patreon, where I've got my culture.
On to the next. This is the next one, right? So that one was Latin America. So Cleveland video 2. Oh, I'm not going to be downloading this. I'm gonna look at the time. The time is 1 hour, 1 minute, 30 seconds. So let's do another one. Gosh, these are long. Okay. So this next one is 12 insane wars you never heard of. After that, we're gonna do the Vaush debate, which is gonna take forever. Probably not gonna get through that whole thing. So it's gonna end my shit. Okay. So let's go. Let's go on this one. Okay, minute 1:52.
History, and even most history buffs are normally clustered on a handful of topics like World War II or the Roman Empire. The sad thing here is that a lot of truly incredible events just end up falling through the cracks. Across history, there have been countless absolutely incredible wars with great battles that history, but they've been forgotten. This is a video to honor those. These are 12 incredible wars across history that you've probably never.
Dude, have some. You're talking about wars here. Why are you talking about it like it's like a great sandwich you had? This is so weird.
Heard of. My main criteria for this is combining the historical impact of the war.
I guess he did.
How big it was and how generally interesting it is. For obscurity, I'm trying to gear this for a low-level history buff, but there are plenty of wars here that even hardcore history buffs have almost never heard of. This is in no particular order, so let's get started.
Yeah, wars are dope.
Hi, I'm Rudyard, the guy behind Whatifalthist, and wars are expensive. I mean, so many wars across history were lost due to bad financial management. And corruption great and I think it killed about 30 million people, or nearly double World War I. That's not even the craziest thing. This was a war fought by a man who thought it was the second coming of Christ, led a communist revolution.
The Taiping Rebellion. A lot of you are communist. What the hell? Why are you doing that? Okay.
thinking,
this is the Taiping Rebellion, also called the War of the Heavenly Kingdom. And there, I guarantee you that he's not really going to get into even the base detail that I want him to about the ethnic underpinnings. We'll see.
how have I never heard of this? Mid-19th century
How
China
has he
was a
never?
mess. The country was so intensely overpopulated that most people were only barely getting by, while at the same time, the country had fallen technologically behind the West, and China had just faced a humiliating defeat to the British in the Opium Wars. Enter Hong Shuquan, a South Chinese peasant who, after meeting with an American missionary from Kentucky, had dreams where he believed himself to be the second son of Christ, destined to form a new religion and liberate China from its Manchu barbarian overlords. He was able to muster an army of peasants and bandits that marched across.
Okay, so one thing that we got to note: number one, cool that he said Manchu. The very important thing to know is that the Manchus, which are the people who live in this region up here, related to the Koreans and the Mongols in certain ways, they are not Han Chinese. The Han Chinese heartland is here. This is Manchuria. This is China proper, the Han mainland, or not mainland, but heartland. And the Taiping Rebellion was they were far from the they started over here, right? So they're far from the heartland of the Han and from the heartland of necessarily the emperor. Yeah.
Across south central China, seizing the city of Nanjing to form a new heavenly kingdom that was built on gender equality, free love, and communism. The Taipings ran out of.
Why is he saying communism? I don't know where this came from. Is there something I don't know about this? I don't think that it's like communist. It might. He called the Incans communist too, but like it's not like they were influenced by Marx. This is like pre-Marx. Stop. It's not communist.
Initiative in a northern campaign when they tried to seize the imperial capital of Beijing, and the government's Mongol horse archer.
Based, Anthony. I'm not gonna. I mean, not based. China, don't come after me.
For cavalry, and the winter weather wiped out their army. The rest of the war was basically a bloody multi-year slog as the imperial forces tried to grind down the Taiping rebels. Some highlights of the war was that an imperial commander called Zheng Guofan was sent to his home province of Hunan to fight off the Taiping rebellions, and then built an army that defeated the Taipings literally from just talking to neighbors and getting friends of friends to join. The Imperials also had a white, largely American and British mercenary force that were the spear tip of their army, and by the time the Taiping capital was seized, Hong Shuquan had gone totally insane, pretending that no war was secretly going on outside, almost like Ba Sing Se in The Last
There is no war in Ba Sing Se.
Airbender, putting out religious edicts and smoking opium in his massive harem.
Hell yeah, brother. That sounds awesome.
Demetrius's invasion of India. Now, this is a war you almost never hear about. You see, India didn't have historical records before around 1000 AD when the Muslims invaded, so you could technically have an Indian Genghis Khan that we would have never heard of. However, long story short, after the fall of Alexander the Great's empire, a Greek colonial state developed in modern Afghanistan that later spread into Pakistan. Very surprisingly, this kingdom converted to Buddhism. We can piece together.
That's not surprising.
That a great conqueror from this Greek-Afghan kingdom conquered across the whole north of India in the 2nd century BC. His armies reached nearly to the edge of Bangladesh before he died, which would have made him one of the great conquerors in Indian and possibly all of world history. However, since records are so
neocon version,
that's all we know. Number 3, the Anlushan Rebellion. Of the 10 bloodiest wars in history, 8 were fought predominantly in China. I had to cut a lot of Chinese wars from this list since I think a lot of them have very little impact outside China, and Western audiences wouldn't find them interesting, but this really deserves a place here. In the 8th century, China was the wealthiest and most powerful nation in the world. The Tang dynasty controlled a giant empire that stretched deep into Central Asia, largely by co-opting Central Asian peoples into their empire to do the fighting. This resulted in a balance of power between the Central Asian military commanders and the civilian Han Chinese government. Here comes An Lushan, a commander from modern-day Uzbekistan. He was a general in the Chinese army on China's northeastern frontier with the Mongols. An was ambitious and had built up an alliance structure with other commanders, and the emperor felt threatened by this and tried to have him fired, which just resulted in An rebelling, burning the Chinese capital down and killing the emperor. There are a couple of funny side notes in the story, with one being that An was morbidly obese, but the rumor was that he was having an affair with the emperor's favorite concubine, who was considered one of the most beautiful women of her time.
He was having an affair with one of the dude's wives.
The imperial forces were able to assassinate An after he took the capital, but he was so fat the knife wasn't able to cut through his fat, making his death long and protracted. After An's death, both his and the emperor's sons kept the war going. The war
Hmm.
went on for years, racking up an unimaginable death toll of over 20 million, which is over 5 million more than World War I. And remember, this is the early Middle Ages when China had a population somewhere in the range of 70 million. The Anlushan Rebellion thus was a big inflection point in all of Chinese history, where the system of building empires based off alliances with Central Asian tribes just stopped working. The bureaucrats gained total power over society, Buddhism lost it to Confucianism, and every ethnic Han regime afterwards was isolationist. Number 4, the Second Congo War.
Seems like
This
a
war
good
is
thing to be.
technically still happening, and horrifyingly, it's the bloodiest
Ooh,
war since
that's
World War
popping off
II.
right now too,
In the
unfortunately.
1990s, Central Africa was experiencing acute overpopulation. This meant that the genocide in Rwanda resulted in people fleeing to related tribes in the Congo, which, through cascading effects, resulted in the Democratic Republic of Congo collapsing as a sort of functioning nation. Rwandan-based Tutsi rebels attacked west across their country, making their way against the government forces to the outskirts of the capital Kinshasa, which is legitimately impressive considering the Congo is the size of Western Europe. This is called Africa's World War, since countless countries, including Sudan and Angola, got involved in order to get in on the action or protect their borders. This war was so horrifying that it saw the collapse of society and sort of stable government to be replaced by a Mad
It's not
Max
what you
package
want
of
to happen.
warlords, slavery, child soldiers, genocide against pygmies, and stuff like that. Armies would wander the countryside
Yeah,
raping,
that's still
pillaging, and
happening.
feeding off the local
It's still
population.
happening.
A reason the warlords could keep fighting for so long was that they were in fact supplying the coltan that goes into our smartphones during the computer revolution.
Incentives,
The
once
hated
again.
leader of the government forces died while the government forces started to beat the Rwandan rebels, which resulted in peace talks in 2002. Some warlords are still independent even today, however, and so the remnants of the war continues. Number 5, the Imjin War. Japan in the late 16th century was the main country in Asia that was able to technologically adapt to the West. The Japanese had implemented Western-style muskets, formations, and the like alongside their naturally incredible samurai to form what was probably the best army in the world at the time. Japan had also just finished their civil war and was burning with energy as their shogun, or basically military dictator Hideyoshi, planned an attack on Korea that would hopefully become the springboard for a conquest of China and all of East Asia. The Japanese invaded Korea and had a quick
Yeah,
series
they
of
really screwed
victories,
over
seizing
Rhodesia.
control of much of the country rapidly. However, the tide of war was turned literally and figuratively by probably one of the greatest military commanders of all time, Yi Sun Sin. Yi won the Battle of Mianyongyang Strait. God, I hope I pronounced that correctly, in which his 13 ships were able to wipe out 330 Japanese ships. And some of those brilliant tactical moves in history, the
There was some
Koreans
weather
got
there.
the Japanese fleet stuck in a tidal pool in which they rammed into each other.
Wait, did he
This
just
was a
say
veritable
Sun
Salamis
Yat-sen,
of
but
the
badly?
Orient, in which the Japanese naval defeats meant they had trouble supplying their army. An interesting side note is that the Koreans had these precursors to ironclads called turtle boats that they'd fight the Japanese with. As the war dragged on for years, the Chinese, who were the vassal overlords of the Koreans, were able to reinforce the Korean peninsula, thus meaning the Japanese were unable to conquer Korea. This defeat, compounded by the death of the Japanese commander Hideyoshi, meant that Japan stopped expansionism. Tokugawa seized
For
power and
now.
turned Japan inwards and rejected Western technology for centuries, thus stalling the rise of the Japanese Empire by
We'll see how that works out
centuries.
for them.
Number 6, the War of the Triple Alliance.
Now
For
you got
every
anime,
Napoleon, Alexander,
tentacle
and Genghis
porn.
Khan, there are like 5 wannabes. Saddam Hussein's Napoleon III's or Gaddafi's. However, the figure who takes the cake for the most delusional attempt at world conquest is a certain Francisco Solano Lopez, dictator of
Hmm.
19th century Paraguay. He believed himself to be the South American Napoleon and was supporting a side in the Uruguayan Civil War. When that side lost, he decided to save them, but the little problem was that Paraguay was hundreds of miles from Uruguay,
Yeah, that's a
divided between
problem.
it by Argentina and Brazil, countries that together have 27 times Paraguay's population. However, he did start that war with the Triple Alliance of Argentina, Brazil, and Uruguay
Oh
forming against
God,
Little
this
Paraguay.
I know
The
this war.
Paraguayan
It's
military was
terrible.
far better than the others and actually made some admirable conquests before they were inevitably forced on the defensive. This war was absolutely brutal for Paraguay, so much so that practically every male in the country fought. 70% of its male population died, with Solano Lopez wandering around the capital, pistol in hand, ordering any man he saw to fight in the front. Rumor has it polygamy took root in Paraguay afterwards to make up for the lack of men.
I've heard
Number
that.
7.
Can't
The Great
confirm it, but it would
Northern
make
War.
sense.
By God, the comparison of this war to the last one is so jarring. Geopolitically, the year 1700 was a weird place. It was a world where Germany was a chessboard that other countries fought over, and Russia was a medieval backwater, while Poland controlled most of Eastern Europe, and the Swedes were the dominant military power. Sweden had been ruled by military geniuses for the last 50 or so years, and had a sort of military hegemony over the region. When the King of Sweden died, he was replaced by a 16-year-old boy. In a drunken brawl, the kings of Denmark and Russia, later teaming up with Poland, Lithuania, and Saxony, agreed this was the time to take Sweden on and unseat its dominance. However, little did they know that the boy king of Sweden, Charles XII, just happened to be one of the greatest geniuses in military history. Charles, in a series of brilliant campaigns, defeated the Russians, Danes, Polish, and Saxon forces, seizing control of all of Scandinavia.
Okay, so I'm gonna quit this one. What I'm gonna do is we're gonna do the Vaush thing. I'm gonna go. I'm gonna take another 10 minutes. Let me see if I can get this on here. What's up with that? Yo, okay. Sick. So let's get that right there. And then I'm gonna put a timer over here. I'm gonna make that full screen. And I'm gonna timer. Oh, okay. 10 minutes. I will be back in 10 minutes. Attrition is a bitch, Sweden. Yes. Yeah, it sure is. Okay. I'll be right back. But when I get back, we're going to watch this. Wish that was bigger. Oh. There we go. I'm on time. Okay. Wait, now I got to figure this thing out. Oh, beeping. Okay. Okay, cool. Let's do this. So this is Vaush. Look at the time there. 125.05, 125.05. We're going to start Vaush. He starts this, by the way, with like a teaser intro type thing that, of course, Vaush selects to make What If Alt Hist looks bad, but I haven't seen any of this. So we're going to look at it from a, from our own perspective, not unbiased, but our own perspective. All right, here we go.
One thing at a time.
America has
I
different
agree.
geography, it has a different history. It has
Oh
a
my
different
God.
governing system.
Yes, I
And
agree.
so why
They're
is all of
different
that being compressed
countries.
down to racism?
I agree. Wait, hold on. Calm down.
You said that the
He did just ask one question.
You're
only
very. Oh
definition
my
you
God!
could use
Please,
were
please.
differences in
I'm
productivity
begging
work
you.
is racism.
Calm.
Please explain.
I wasn't accusing you of being racist right here. I was asking
literally
you.
said that.
Calm.
Did he say it?
Go
Please
back into the
quit
video.
being
It's like the
defensive. Wait,
14
please.
It's so patronizing to just talk down to someone and say, calm. Like, what do you mean? What are you trying to do? You're not being legitimately nice there, but whatever.
Please,
Mark.
please.
Go ahead and look at it.
Oh my God,
Like,
please. I'm begging
there's no
you.
way-
I was
there's no
asking
way
you
you
a
could not be
question.
proven
I
wrong
was
here.
asking you a yes/no question at the beginning before I answer. Please, this isn't a gotcha. I'm not trying to trap you. I'm trying to answer the
I'm sure
damn
you know about
question.
gotchas.
No, I don't. I don't gotcha
It's
people.
your
They
entire
they
channel.
walk directly into walls over and over again. I'm
Let's
not
see
trying
what
to
he
gotcha
says.
anyone, okay?
Hi.
Hello.
You hear me? How you doing?
I'm doing wonderfully. How about you?
I'm doing pretty well. Can't complain. I'm sorry about the delay. There were some technical problems, and I did one debate, I did one kind of Zoom YouTube interface like this before, but there was a glitch in my software, and so we had to figure it out. But I'm sorry I left you all waiting. I know you've been going for a bit of time.
Oh, ain't nothing. We were talking about cartoons the whole time.
Cartoons. Love
Nice.
cartoons.
My,
Sorry, I don't know why I just yelled
yeah,
cartoons right into the mic.
It's interesting. I think you could write a couple very interesting books on what cartoons symbolize in society. And
Of course.
like another big YouTuber, JJ McCullough, did a whole list of Canadian.
JJ McCullough talked shit to me one time, and I actually agree with a lot of his points, but like, screw that guy. He talked shit to me for no reason. What an asshole. Well, he had a reason for it, but it was a dumb reason. He misrepresented me. Yeah, so screw JJ McCullough, I guess. Internet beef, but he won't notice because I'm too small. But he's got a channel with 900,000 subscribers, but he gets like 100,000 views on his videos, which is not good.
Monster cartoons, and I thought that was a very funny book.
Yeah, well, any excuse to see, people punching holes through mountains or, shooting lasers out of their eyes. I just like it when it looks flashy.
Oh yeah, brother.
Exactly.
I appreciate you hopping on.
Of course.
So I had a couple of questions. I don't formally structure anything, but I watched your video on social justice and a few videos later after that, and I had a couple of questions, concerns that I wanted to talk about with you.
Okay.
So I understand you mostly do historical content.
Wait. One of the comments. Jesus Christ, he looks just like I thought he would. I love that. Oh, I can't highlight. Oh, I got to move my face out of the way. Here's what we'll do for this. So you guys can see the chat because that's usually the funnier part. I'll put myself in the bottom right for this one. But I can't. If I was using the other thing to share the video, I could do it. But Jesus Christ, he looks just like I thought he would. I love that.
It's not my field of expertise. I can't comment on it that substantively. But I do know that you've gotten some pushback for what you've put in those videos. And looking at your social justice video, I think I might understand a common trend. The main issue being, at least with regards to the social justice video, it feels like you came into that with a fairly strong pre-existing ideological bias, and all the information you had on all the many subjects that you touched on in that video, you pulled them together to narrativize them into a story consistent with your pre-existing beliefs. Like you looked up.
Isn't that what everybody does? Isn't that what Vaush does? That's what I do. I mean, what? I'm going to present something that isn't within my narrative that I believe is true. I mean, that's what a cosmology is. That's what a an underlying view of the world is. So like that's kind of what it is. So I don't think that this is necessarily even a bad thing.
But the stars, and you wanted to see a dinosaur, and it didn't really matter what the stars looked like.
This is one of these
You had
dumb
to find a
abstract
dinosaur
arguments
in the constellation. You know what I mean? So there were like a bunch of pieces of info there that I think were contradictory or didn't fit together
Okay,
that well.
let's
And
get
it gave me the
specifics.
impression altogether that you were inconsistently reactionary in ways I wanted to talk about.
Oh God, reactionary. I mean,
I
get to the
disagree.
specifics.
So
I disagree. They're not talking about anything. I'm sorry. 3 minutes, 34 seconds in. They're not really talking about anything.
as I've studied history, being fair and objective isn't giving 50-50 to both sides. Being fair and objective is looking for the truth and seeing where the truth leads you. And across history, you see periods of fanaticism. And we see a lot of the prerequisites for periods of fanaticism that exist today. And across history, you saw the French Revolution, you saw the religious fanaticism like the Puritans of the 17th century, you saw the Spanish Inquisition. Before that, you saw
Spanish Inquisition
the
is a good thing,
flagellants after the
actually.
Black Death, or guys that would basically whip themselves after the Black Death because they felt guilt, that they felt immense survivor's guilt they were still alive. And before that, you had all sorts of things across the ancient world and peasant rebellions in the Middle Ages as well. And the common thread between all of these is that when times get tough, like they are now, where basically average income has gone down, a lot of people live really hard lives in a lot of ways. And under those conditions, people get radicalized. And I think social justice is that radical movement. And I try to build my work for posterity. And because of that, I cannot stand aside when social justice,
I don't even know what posterity means,
is a radical movement, and to give it an objective opinion would.
Okay, they're still talking about these big ideas. I get it. I like talking about big ideas too, but they're not getting into the crux of what they mean. Vaush came in with all these abstract arguments with no specifics to back them up, which it's the beginning, so I get it. I hope they get into the specifics of what he did. And now Rudyard, freaking Whatifalthist, is responding in kind, and I'm not a big fan of that. It's not interesting to me. So I hope this gets better. If not, we're gonna skip it.
Be to state thus. And so my argument going into it was that social justice is radical, which I will prove as this debate goes along. But at the same time,
dude,
I
look at all the
wanted to
Pepes
make
in the
something
chat.
that posterity would be able to look back upon, where every single era of history, you have the people who would basically say, we need to give both sides argument. And the truth is complicated. And because of that, you see all sorts of, no one side can hold the truth because no single worldview is capable of encapsulating it. But like before World War II, you saw people who thought that starting the war was not a good idea. Before World War I,
a good idea.
You saw people who thought that war would never happen. And in every era of history, conventional opinion was wrong. And I want to look for when conventional opinion is wrong.
So the term radical doesn't really have a consistent definition, but the way
they always say this. The leftists just define words however they want to.
Use it suggests to me that you think it has a negative bent. You know, if you're going to argue that social unrest...
Dude, he didn't get into the crux of anything he said. He's just like, the way that you use it suggests to me that you think this way, and just decides how he thinks.
Is often caused by...
Yo, look at that mug with a... Oh, I thought it was a dragon. I think it's like a...
inequality or tumult. Then I would agree with that. You could go back to the suffrage movement, the civil rights movement. You could go back to the abolitionist movement or the Revolutionary War. You could go back as far as you wanted. And yeah, generally, when things are a little bit less steady, people too tend to commit harder to more radical ideas. I guess the problem that I have with the framing in your video is that that's a good thing, at least in the context of the movements we're discussing now. I don't care about 50-50 representation for any given talking point, by the way. I only care about what's right, you know. You very specifically
he gets to tell you what's right, though.
Some
That's what
types
happens.
of social justice in your YouTube video as exempt from your criticism. Basically, the civil rights movement and back before then, also environmentalism.
I'd like to cut you off there for a second, please.
Sure.
In your video, you said the civil rights movement and the abolitionist movement were descendants of are the ancestors of social justice, which is not true. Social justice.
No. Oh, crap. My camera went out. I got to put another battery in. But No, absolutely. Rudyard is wrong here. Yes, the civil rights movement is absolutely related to social justice. It is the result of it. I think so. I think he's wrong. I guess I agree with Vaush, but not that I agree with like his positions on everything, but I agree with his analysis of the situation. So 1 second, just switching out the battery. I'm gonna get power that's I'm going to get power that's you just plug in-able, but I don't have it yet.
This is an entirely different historic chain that you see start in the 40s to the 90s, basically, the post-war period. And that's a long period, but it did take a bit of time to evolve. So,
wow, what happened after World War II
challenge
that made these ideas take hold?
Sorry?
How? The civil rights movement was in the 60s,
please, let me
of course, so
finish.
that would fit with it.
Please let me finish. This is dude, this guy is not meant to be talking to other people. Sorry, Rudyard, but yeah.
In that time range.
The civil rights period, it was entirely different groups of people. When you look at the logic of the modern social justice movement, it takes ideas that were invented by former Marxists in the post-war period and two broad groups, the Frankfurt School and French philosophers.
Okay.
And for example, the idea...
And Vaush is raising his eyebrows because he perceives talking about the Frankfurt School as something that's inherently anti-Semitic. I assume. I shouldn't assume that, but that's the way I see it, probably, even though it's definitely a soft power thing to talk about. Civil rights law is what gives social justice ideology teeth. For the third time this video, shout out Bog Beef, good old boys. Hashtag patronage. It's the whole legal basis of big government enforcing egalitarianism. Correct, JC.
Idea that gender can be separated from sex, that's an idea that hasn't existed for any other period of history.
Okay, well, that's just not true. And whatever.
Except with Simone de Beauvoir starting in the early 50s. And then that idea was taken up by other philosophers like Judith Butler, like Foucault. And so the idea that gender is separate from sex, again, postmodernist idea from that period, from academia.
This is what I mean.
Finish.
Well, wait.
So gender, okay. On gender, guys, there's been different genders, third, fourth genders forever. Things like eunuchs are genders, but also like gender is the cultural side. There's nature and nurture, right? Like you can, like, I think that humans are sexually dimorphic. They are. Men and women are different, but different societies have different roles for men and women, and they do go along a certain line, but like the roles for men and women in like a steppe tribe society is what makes this useful. Like when you talk about gender, and there are people on the extreme peripheries, there's like a small percentage that fall into something else, but different societies absolutely have third, fourth, fifth genders. The whole two-spirit thing is kind of made up. It is kind of made up. It seems like it was created by people, but there are other examples in other places that do serve purposes. I can't really get into the details of it just because like even talking about it is just frowned upon on YouTube. So I don't care that much. But absolutely, gender and sex are different things in the context of cultural anthropological study, which is the context in which interaction between humans would work. So it's the nurture side of nature versus nurture, and it doesn't mean that sex isn't also a thing. But let's continue.
Please
let him finish.
Hold on.
Please let him finish.
Because I don't want you to just go ahead and say a bunch of wrong things.
No, but I'd
first
like to
of
get
all,
my point
the civil.
across, you cannot construct my argument properly unless you hear it.
Well, but so far the construction is faulty. The concrete is cracking. The civil rights movement was informed by Marxist ideas. Marx was around like it absolutely was. The basis of critical theory, the idea that you should analyze. Well, don't get indignant already. It certainly was.
Don't get indigenous.
Marxist social analysis has been influencing philosophers and activists for well over a century, and the conceptualization of gender and sex being, as you say it, uniform until the past 50 years is completely ahistorical. There are entire modern civilizations that have had third genders, clearly not three sexes, three genders, for hundreds of years. That's just simply not.
I mean, just eunuchs, okay? Eunuchs is a manifestation of gender. Yeah, maybe somebody didn't choose it, but it does function as a third gender within society as something other than male and female. And yeah, it's not innate. It's not she, jim, jur. It's not fey and fey self or whatever. But like, yeah, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about like, if you want to study anthropology, you've got to study gender roles, and it's not the same thing as sex. It's just not. It's the cultural side of it.
Not true. But even if there were
hate talking about it. Both sides
conceptualizations
get
of
mad at
modern
me
social
on it.
justice,
I
which
just
are a
don't like
product of
it.
postmodernism exclusively, I wouldn't have an issue with that. You know, you'd have to demonstrate the harm done by those ideas.
Give me a couple, give me a hot second, because I'm going to reply to each of those. So for the first of them, the social justice movement didn't have ties to, sorry, Freudian slip that I'm sure you wanted me to have. The civil rights movement didn't have Marxist ties because that was something that the FBI explicitly looked for. And people really, really tried to attach a Marxist label onto Martin Luther King, but he kept—
Wait, are you fucking dumb? It fucking did. Oh, sorry, I shouldn't be saying this. Malcolm X. Oh Lord, this guy is filibustering. Oh, he's annoying. I'm confused, bro. This dude is a douche.
Yeah, and much of his
he can't stand being challenged even a little bit. I mean, guys, I'm on Vaush's side here. This is crazy. Rudyard is regurgitating James Lindsay. I did not realize that. I don't know who that is. Alas, his take is not right wing enough. Yeah, I mean, I'm with you that it's not right wing enough. In this particular case, I'm on the side of Bog Beef. He convinced me.
Movement led by him did not have a lot of Marxist philosophy, because if they found a Marxist,
this guy seems pretentious AF.
Then the federal government
read the comments. This is awesome.
Basically, just federal government and racists in American society at the time would have just used it to pillory the movement, and so it explicitly kept away. And it didn't really come from Marxist roots, because if you look at the liberation movements of that period of history, they came mostly from a liberal background. So full male suffrage, that was something that started in the early 19th century and progressed as—
full male suffrage was one of the largest mistakes of Western civilization and needs to be repealed. And the 19th Amendment.
As male suffrage is tied to the amount of your male population that fought in the military. And so that came through liberals across the 19th century, and it continued into the early 20th century. With the suffragette movement, suffragettes were mostly upper middle class women who, again, came from a liberal mindset. And when you look at liberalism, it's the idea that all people have equal worth, and the equal worth under the law. And liberalism is a philosophy that's in many ways derived from Christianity, and thus under the objective legal eye of God.
I blame the French for atheism in the West. They really screwed it up, this whole liberalism crap.
And that's just not the philosophy for Marxism. If the civil rights movement was infiltrated by Marxists—
Wait, hold on.
Dude, he has to let Vaush talk a little bit. Holy crap, man. He's not letting him do it at all. Man is trying to do anime mind games. I can see Pelosi slipping from his ear right now. Oh my God.
Wait, I have to interject here. I never said the civil rights movement was infiltrated by Marxists. I said that his ideas and the ideas
I'm enjoying myself.
The civil rights movement were influenced by Marxist philosophy, which they were. Liberal philosophers, liberal political thinkers were influenced by what Marx wrote, because Marx was— well, he wasn't the only person who did this, certainly, but it's been mostly attributed to him. The ideas inherent to critical theory. Now, critical theory these days is taught to liberals and by liberals in a bunch of departments. It's not this like communist exclusive thing. They were pilloried as Marxist influenced the civil rights movement. So, you know, regardless of the extent of that influence, that was certainly something attributed to them.
I mean, realistically, everyone is influenced by every other philosopher. And give me a second to get back to some of the earlier points. But I mean, I'm influenced by Mark. I'm influenced by Mark.
Oh God, this guy can't talk. Oh Lord. But the civil rights—
I'm also influenced by Zoroaster, Muhammad.
He said liberalism would derive from Christianity. Oh my God, this dude is so dumb. What a moron. There were 3 expletives in there.
I'm influenced by Marx. I'm also influenced by Zoroaster, Muhammad, by
said Zoroaster.
And these ideas all
Zoroastrianism is like ancient Persian religion.
And I don't see a trajectory from— I don't think it's useful to parcel out what percentage of each philosophy. And yes, you could find some Marxist influence in the civil rights movement, but I don't think it's useful. And a point you made in your rebuttal to my video was that the abolitionist movement is part of the same trajectory as modern social justice, which just has no basis. The abolitionists were built out of the radical Republican agenda, which was a subset of the Republican Party that existed mostly in the upper tier of northern states. And their platforms were, in effect, trying to settle the Western frontier. They were very pro-capitalist.
Yes,
this is an
pro-business.
obfuscation.
They
So wait.
What does obfuscation mean? I forget what obfuscation means. I hate when people. I try not to use big words. I know I screw up sometimes. I can do that, but like, who needs to use the word obfuscation, man? You're just trying to sound smart, dumbass.
What I said,
remarkably imperialist. Party,
what I
but
said,
wait. Pro-black.
This is a misinterpretation again. I did not say these were the same.
You literally
movements.
said that in my video.
No, he didn't say that.
said that it was a continuation of the same historical trend. Now, obviously, if you say something is the continuation of the same historical trend and then go back 150 years, you will find that, in fact, earlier groups do have some different values. But the underlying trend is the acknowledgement of racial inequality and the desire to address it through civic, cultural, and legal systems to amend these problems both in representation and in economic outcomes. In that respect, that movement,
Vaush
the
just
abolitionist
sounds better.
movement, is identical to what we have today in many respects.
Thank you, JC.
Obviously, 150 years have passed. You know, settling the Western frontier isn't a cavalier idea in modern social justice movements. That's what it's all about, really, equality. And you can trace that back to the Enlightenment and further beyond if you really wanted to.
I mean, realistically, the idea of racial equality and using legality to redress racial problems, it's in many cultures. You see it in Islam. You see it in Christian societies in the Middle Ages. And if you can't draw a trajectory through the people themselves, you're not going to find a realistic continuity. What happened to those radical Republicans?
Well, the abolitionists that we think
of... Please let me finish.
Well, you know, W.E.B. Du Bois or like Frederick Douglass.
Middle-class people in the upper Midwest in New England. Meanwhile,
what is the area
who led the civil rights movement, they were predominantly Northeastern intellectuals who voted Democrat in the 1930s, as well as Jews who immigrated to Europe from 1900. I once went through a list of, I'm writing a cultural history of America.
That doesn't have anything to do with the ideological
trajectories of American ethnography.
But that has nothing to do with the ideological through line.
You do not find, it's a totally different demographic.
Wait, we're not talking about demographics. Wait. What if all
intellectuals that are
we're not talking about demographic. You can't say that two like similar ideas are dissimilar because one of them was formulated by like Southern groups and the other by people in the Northwest. We're talking about common ideas here, like racial equality, which does exist in many cultures. I've never said this is exclusive to the West, but the abolitionist thinkers, you know, Frederick Douglass and so on, they wrote texts that were cited by Martin Luther King in the Civil Rights Movement. And Martin Luther King is currently the biggest, you know, figure that's cited when talking about historical civil rights in the modern Black Lives Matter movement. So there is a definite continuous ideological trend from A to B to C. And I feel like the only reason you would deny that fact is because you like what the abolitionists did, but you don't like what BLM.
Yeah, T-Rex, that's exactly what I was thinking.
And you have to explain that disconnect by somehow separating these extremely well-connected movements.
Bro, how many books on American intellectual history have you read? Give me some time.
Oh no, dude, he just asked him how many books he read, even though Vaush just made a completely reasonable, well thought out argument. And he wants, Whatifalthist wants him to cite books he's read? Dude, talk about the argument. What an asshole. Bro, yeah, I saw that. Bro.
Titles. Give me some book titles to back up what you're saying.
We're going right to that. Wait, you need a...
Let's look at the comments. Bro, everyone's just saying bro. Look at the
citation on Frederick Douglass was cited by civil rights. Wait, you need a citation on Frederick Douglass was cited by civil rights thinkers? If you need a citation.
You need a that no, he did just say that. You need a citation that Frederick Douglass was cited by civil rights. You should know that if you're involved in this type of stuff. I don't even do like modern American culture in that sense. I do like contemporary, but not like modern 20th century, basically ever. So like, my God.
I will reference Battle Cry of Freedom to talk about the policies of the Radical Republican Party by James McPherson. Cynical Theory to look at the development of how
this is pseudo-intellectualism at its height right now. Why not address what I've said?
In between,
just address what he said,
the rise
man.
and fall of communism.
If you've read so much, then why not?
Those are three different ideological trajectories.
Why not counter the argument then?
Because Confucian philosophy influenced in the Enlightenment Europe, that America as that Europe is a deviation of Chinese philosophy. It's creating a single logical line and then extrapolating.
Okay, we're literally talking about the same goals in the same country, you have the abolitionists who fought for racial equality for black people, to the civil rights movement, which fought for racial equality for black people.
You can do that,
to the
right?
modern BLM movement,
very
which
easy.
fights for racial equality for black people. And every single successive group quotes and heavily cites the preceding groups. This isn't like some, well, a butterfly
You're right,
flapped its
T-Rex.
wings in China, therefore that butterfly is responsible for the American Revolutionary War bullshit. This is a very direct line. And for you to respond to that with like a how many books have you read suggests to me a kind of, I don't know, insecurity in your ability to refute.
Dude, I fully agree with what Vaush is saying right now, and he's doing it in such an expressive way. I'm actually in love with it.
That fact. Why don't you believe these are part of the same movement? They're clearly fighting.
Dude, he's making a nonsense
the fact
argument.
that you bring up no historical examples between
what? You don't.
The leaders of said movements, or show that you've done research on the topic, because no one among historians, I have read nowhere that the modern abolitionists.
Dude, Whatifalthist is right now arguing about someone else not showing. Dude, this guy is the king of pulling ideas out of his own ass. Like, that's what he does, which is fine, dude. You're a YouTuber, but you're acting like a history teacher. And I quit being a history teacher because I didn't like that shit.
Movement is a direct descendant of is a direct ancestor of the modern social justice movement.
I'm not responsible for what you've read.
Evidence.
And no,
I have made my point.
Please, can I finish?
Well, you have to answer mine. How are these?
I've answered my question in the best way I can.
You've answered it by saying, I haven't read an answer to that. Like, you've answered my question by saying you don't know how to answer my question. I want a real answer. How are these not the same movement?
In the way I will.
Okay. So then I will follow through on that and say, since these are clearly part of a contiguous social trend in the United States, you know, from A to B to C, it seems odd to me that you would denounce social justice when it happened before, or sorry, when it happens now, but you would accept it when it happens before. It's a really common trend in conservatives. Well, they'll go like, oh, of course I support the civil rights movement. And then they'll do all the same attacks on the modern BLM movement that conservatives did against the civil rights movement 50 years ago, you know?
Dude, Vaush is right. And I don't have the same conclusions as him, but he's totally right. I mean, if he was saying it in a different way, it could literally be Bog Beef doing it.
I have made my argument. You choose not to accept it. I'd like to ask you a question.
What was the argument? Can you repeat it for me?
No, you can't. It wasn't.
The fans can go back and watch it.
What? But you didn't respond to it. You just said I haven't read in my books that.
To briefly spend 5 seconds on this, I've said these movements are remarkably different demographics. You cannot trace a strong ideological lineage between them.
Wait, what do you mean demographics?
This group spoke to this group, which spoke to this group. Because of that, I think you are drawing a loose connection.
They're different generations. Of course, they're different demographics. They're separated by like 50 years. Wait, do you not think a movement can be a part of the same contiguous like intellectual trend if
it is, but you need
the
to
different links in the chain are in different time periods?
Bro, give me an example of a academic school created by radical Republicans in the mid 19th century. Give me an example of that school influencing modern East Coast, the modern leftist movement. Give me a historic lineage without just listing single figures.
Can you wait? I'm sorry.
Look, I mean, if you gave him some time, you could absolutely go back and trace citations specifically back. I'm sure that you could. It would take time. But like the fact that Vaush can't cite it off the top of his head is not a mark against him. It's an unreasonable request. Are we sure one of these guys wasn't a Marine? Because this is a lot of uncomplicated shit made complicated. Yeah. Well, I don't think Rudyard or Vaush could do that, but yes, it is uncomplicated shit made complicated.
You find an example of Simone de Beauvoir setting up any personal gender studies classes that teach that gender and sex are
that's
different?
easy. So
Simone de Beauvoir, you can?
Simone de Beauvoir had her philosophy influenced by Marx. Simone de Beauvoir then immigrated to America. She was part of the broader postmodernist movement. The postmodernist movement was in France
kind of like the abolitionists were part of the broader racial equality movement.
Please, the fact that you're
interrupting me
means that you don't want me to finish. The Frankfurt School, meanwhile, immigrated to America. The Frankfurt School people immigrated to northeastern cities, going to schools like Columbia, Harvard, etc. Thus, from the Frankfurt, and they also read a tremendous amount.
Oh, okay. I see what he's arguing now. He's arguing that the ideas in either social justice or the 60s come from the Frankfurt School. But like, yeah, and that's true. These were new ideas, I guess, that were influenced in, but they came into a movement that was already pre-existing. So he's arguing for a larger, okay, I understand his argument now. But yeah, okay.
Not a postmodernist.
Wait, so they attended these schools?
So they attended these schools? I don't know.
Postmodernist philosophers descended from the, you can see the mono-social justice philosophers descended from the postmodernism.
Wait, how?
Like,
okay, I'm actually not sure now.
Kimberly Crenshaw.
Wait, these are totally different demographics.
Were students of Foucault.
And Vaush is using his argument back at him. Wait a minute, these are entirely different demographics.
They were students of Marcuse.
Okay,
so,
hold
and
on.
they literally write that. You can see that on their Wikipedia page.
Wait, earlier you said, wait, please, because you run on a train, you try to make like 30 points. Please.
Dude, Vaush is begging him to just slow down, and he just keeps making more points. Ask him where the Frankfurt School came from. Yeah, that's a good question. That would be a great question, AC. Ask him where the Frankfurt School came from. This is your brain on James Lindsay, trying to avoid confronting the whole civil rights law point we always talk about. Yeah. Class struggle and equity, not social justice equality. Yeah, different things. And I think that's the point that Rudyard is trying to make. He's making it badly. But I would say I'm somewhere in the middle. I think they're both valid.
Marx and from
I'm not sure Vaush
so
disagrees.
the modern left.
You claimed, okay, that the teaching that gender and sex are separate is a product of like Frankfurt School postmodernist influence. So you now need to prove that postmodernists founded the American public school system. They didn't. Well, then how can you say there's any connection whatsoever between postmodernism and the teaching of gender and sex being divergent concepts in modern public education? Those were set up by thinkers in the 19th and 20th centuries, influenced by Enlightenment thinking. How could there possibly be any influence from postmodernism?
It's mostly true.
Ideas influence other ideas. Oxford is founded in the 12th century, but they're not teaching scholasticism anymore. And
what do you mean by that?
Ideas influence other ideas. Of teachers,
what do you mean by that? Ideas influence other ideas. Oh my God, dude. Vaush is just trying to get him to acknowledge an elementary point here, and he's not doing it. It's so frustrating.
Overwhelmingly,
he's making Vaush look good.
Politics of universities overwhelmingly left.
You're doing a bunch of points again. What do you mean? Ideas influence ideas.
I mean, if you want to simplify the whole world into a sentence, sure. But Vaush, there's a question I'd like to ask.
No, wait. What do you mean? Because you said there's no way the abolitionist movement could inform the civil rights movement.
Half an hour talk. We've done 20 minutes on this question.
Well, it's very silly because you essentially admitted to not answering it. You said there's no way the abolitionist movement could have led to the civil rights movement.
Out of me past this.
Because
you're not going to get me to talk in this.
Oh my God. Okay. Give me a few minutes. I need to pee again because I've been drinking a lot of water here. 1 second. Okay. Let's continue. Wait, let me read these. Marxists don't need to found an institution to get their ideas spread via it. What the fuck is Vaush on about? Yeah. So what Vaush is doing is Vaush is right. I mean, so Vaush is agreeing with your point. The thing is that Whatifalthist just disagreed with it. And Vaush is trying to get him to admit that that's a thing that happens on the specific case. It's very complicated. Lindsay is a liberal who wants to return to the 90s. Yeah, I mean, look, I'd love to return to the 90s as well, but what comes after the 90s? It's the 2000s. If you can hold us straight in the 90s forever, I'd do it. The preposterous argument about the intellectual lineage of the Frankfurt School. Yeah. Vaush implied that institutions can only propagate the philosophies of their founders. Did he? If he did, I disagree with that.
This question anymore.
They're different demographics. And then you said I'd need to show that
what he's actually saying right now is he's trying to make sense of that nonsense argument, which is kind of what Whatifalthist said.
Republican abolitionist school set up and then is being cited by West Coast intellectuals today. But then you're like, well, Frankfurt's responsible for all of modern education, teaching gender and sex separately because like you realize these are incompatible talking points. You can't run away from that. You can't believe both of those things at the same time.
Bro, I answered the question. Like,
you answered it wrong. You were incorrect.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Yeah. Ask me a question.
Bro, everyone in the comments
in
just
the
saying,
rebuttal
bro.
to my video, you said that international productivity statistics, the only way you can argue them is since racism, because every single area of the world really has the same productivity. Would like to back that up, please?
You're going to need to specify more. What did I say exactly?
So you said, for example, I said that people in the third world are paid less than people in the first world because they have lower productivity rates. Thus, according to market standards, you cannot pay them less and have a functioning economy. You said that according to what you have found, that all areas of the world have the same productivity. And so the only way you can use that argument is racism.
Nobody's paid for their productivity.
Yeah, they are.
No, they're absolutely not.
No, people are not. Okay. Vaush is correct. People aren't really paid for their productivity. It's mostly unrelated to what they actually put out. It's, there is some of that, but I think if you looked at it from a huge thing, it's like, some people are not making any productivity. Like there's a lot of nothing jobs in the US, and then some people are making way more income for someone else. I can't get rid of the impression that these dudes are just massive intellectual lightweights, and that's why these debates look like this. I mean, I can't even know what it would be like if Vaush was actually debating, because this is nonsense. Yeah.
Computer models for this. Wages across history are a combination of scarcity of labor and productivity.
What is HPD?
So there's a couple historians like Angus Madison and Peter Turchin. They do a really wonderful job of creating computer models to predict wages across history using those metrics.
The problem
they get it right.
Computer models are crap, and they're made by neoliberals. Give that shit up, dude.
You were asking me a question. The problem with computer models is that people think the output is objective, when in fact the output is largely determined by the preceding input that humans put in. There have been studies shown indicating that in terms of the actual physical productivity, the actual amount of goods produced by a factory worker in China, Mexico, and America, you're not going to see significant differences in productivity. You will see significant differences in pay. The reason for that, well, it's complicated, but the idea of wages tracking perfectly productivity is just not true.
Look, yes, wages do not track productivity, but they track more than he's letting on, because the productivity, like the value of labor in China, it's not valued in the same way of like, there is worth in the geographic closeness and avoiding tariffs of creating it in the United States. So it's not exactly what he's saying, but I don't want to get bogged down in that.
In fact, often people in China and Mexico work quite a bit harder than we do in factories that are just as productive as ours. Funnily enough, they can make, cars or cheap widgets at, the speeds we can or better. It's, entirely doable. The issue that I have is that oftentimes people will use productivity as a kind of moralistic presupposition by which they like determine the worth and the value of a country. Often the economic output of a country is determined by the wealth of that country. So it's kind of like a cyclical problem, right? There could be two countries, one very wealthy, one very poor.
I disagree with him, but I love the way he's arguing.
Far less, not as a product of any
I would like
actual,
to talk to Vaush, actually.
tendency to work from the people who live there, but rather just because they don't have access to the startup capital. And then they get lower wages for what? Well, not for working as hard, for having the misfortune of being.
And it's like, Whatifalthist on this comment from Nordhugger, it's like Whatifalthist is trying to argue the conservative position, but he can't support a real conservative position. So ultimately, he's trying to argue for like, he can only argue within the framework of neoliberalism, and he loses within the framework of neoliberalism. He can't make a real argument because there isn't one within that framework. The Chinese also live in those factories with guards like a prison. Yeah.
Born into a poorer country. That's the issue that I have.
That's
thank you.
The theory you posit would result in the collapse of the modern world economy.
That's such a libertarian answer. I love that. Continue, please.
But the thing is, like, and also you would not find a single economist who could agree with that, or you could not find more than a handful in extremely radical.
The reason you couldn't find this is because, like, oh god, they're gonna keep talking about it, but like it's the finished good existing in China is not worth as much as it existing in the US because of other costs of production. So them actually creating the same thing doesn't matter because there's a bunch of other factors.
How would it collapse things?
And
Wait,
that's because productivity stats vary massively by nation, and that there's no way else it could be, because you have different amounts, different quality of machinery in different areas. You have people who work differing amount of hours. You have differing supply chains involved.
Do you think workers in China work fewer hours than workers in America?
Hardworking, but the coal doesn't get to where they are.
And that is what I think,
running a factory. The coal doesn't get there. They're working on poor machines. Their wages get stolen, so they leave work. The Mexicans would be extremely hardworking, but they would have lower productivity. And what you say about countries not getting capital, that's not true. This is the era of the highest capital availability in the history of man.
Do you think
by
Mexico gets the same capital investment as America?
The U.S. has given 4 times the amount of capital to Africa than the Marshall Plan. If you look at countries like Argentina hyperinflates its currency on average.
This is completely irrelevant to what we're talking about.
And because of that,
are you guys enjoying this? I'm enjoying this. This is great.
That has nothing to do with what we're talking about. Do you think Mexico has the same capital investment per capita in terms of their industry, like as America?
Sorry, who?
Do you think that America and Mexico have the same amount of startup capital available for people to start and develop businesses within their countries?
That's due to a shit ton of historic factors.
Yeah, but do you agree? Wait.
Why
yes.
are we paring down?
Oh wait, hold on. I agree. Wait, one thing at a time.
America has
I
a different
agree.
geography. It has a different history. It has
Oh
a
my
different
God.
governing system.
Yes, I agree.
So why
they're
is all of
different
that being
countries.
compressed down to racism?
I agree. Wait, hold on. Calm down.
You said that the
okay. I thought at the beginning that maybe Vaush was like making this up, that like he was putting it in a certain place out of context, but no, Rudyard is acting kind of unhinged right now, and he really Vaush did not say anything about race.
You're very my God, please. Please. I'm begging you.
Racism.
Calm.
Please explain.
I wasn't accusing you of being racist right here. I was asking you.
Said that.
Calm.
Go
please,
back
quit being defensive. Wait, please. Please.
Go ahead and look at it.
Oh my God, please. I'm begging you. I was asking you a question. I was asking you a yes/no question at the beginning before I answer. Please, this isn't a gotcha. I'm not trying to trap you. I'm trying to answer the damn question. No, I don't. I don't gotcha people. They walk directly into walls over and over again. I'm not trying to gotcha anyone, okay? I was asking, like, I just asked you, you acknowledge these countries have different capital available for business development, which, of course, obviously they do. No one would argue that. Yes, it's because of historical factors. I'm not denying that. We're not at the racist part yet, okay? So, the studies that I've seen on relative worker productivity have been pretty consistent. The idea that a Chinese worker... I don't have any, but if you'd like me to send them to you later, I'd be happy to pull them up. I don't have all of them archived right now.
How many economics books have you read? Give me your top 3.
All of them.
No! How many economics books have you read? Name the books you've read. It's like that meme, like old meme from like the 2000s where people are like, you're wearing a freaking Charles Manson shirt or freaking Marilyn Manson shirt. Name 3 songs by Marilyn Manson. You poser. As an economist, I hate when people talk about economics. It is a subject everyone borrows from, but lacks the fundamental knowledge of. Yeah, I'm fully with you. I've read a bunch of economics history books. I can't name them off the top of my head because I'm not insane, but is Rudyard really trying to outbait a Vaush here? Sure seems like it. Misfit shirt. LOL. Yeah, you know it was the type of guys talking about Misfits and those types of bands.
Give me your top 3.
I can't. I enjoy all of them equally. So anyway, I hope you understand that behavior like that is very unbecoming in immediate conversation. It just makes it seem like you don't have an argument for the field, so you have to run back to the bleachers. Look, in China, factory or sweatshop workers, okay? From what I've read, and this seems to be pretty consistent, they produce as much or more than factory workers here in America. It's not like factories
All that Rudyard needs to say is, but the finished product is of different value when it exists in China versus in the US. It's of a different value. It literally is. And this is true of a bunch of different resources, especially with like drugs, like cocaine in Colombia or Venezuela versus cocaine in Miami versus cocaine in New York. Very different. 20 times different each step.
Reason China are like underproducing. It's like an industrial powerhouse of the planet, you know. But they still get paid way, way, way less. Now, you said that the world economy would be torn apart by the idea that wages aren't proportional to productivity, which is a very funny and very libertarian thing to say. It's like, if my 101 econ models aren't perfectly predictive of the most complicated system in all of human existence,
you have a better theory of the world?
Then the idea that wages track perfectly onto productivity.
Yeah. Do you have an idea? Can you have something you can shove into a computer simulation? Wages come out.
Nobody
wages
can.
As they've existed over the last 1,000 years.
Nobody can.
He's such
yes,
a liberal.
Absolutely, they cannot.
There's loads of historians, Peter Turchin, Angus Madison, who have been able to predict wages across history.
You can predict
from the variables of productivity.
Wait, averages?
Wage supply.
Wait, averages? Well, I thought we're talking about productivity.
Yeah. So,
wouldn't productivity vary between individuals?
The Turchin economic models were able to predict wages across England from looking at the population and the product.
We're not talking about averages. What would that have to do with productivity? Averages.
It's medieval England. Your productivity is attached to how much soil you have. And for example, you can look at stats across the 19th century, look at increases in.
Dude, he's making such a nuanced argument that somebody probably wrote a book about, and he's trying to like narrow it down into a quick conversation. You cannot make arguments like this. You just can't. It's impossible to have a conversation with, and that's what Vaush is dealing with right now. I haven't seen too much of Vaush. I've seen some stuff where it's like, I don't think I'd like this guy, but I haven't looked too far into it. But he comes out looking pretty damn good here. He
in mechanization and increases in industrial ability, and then from that,
I'm gonna try this a third time.
I used to be really into behavioral economics. No one. That's really interesting. If you're in the Discord, and if you're not, join it. But I'd love to hear your takes on basically anything from an economist point of view. Also, I met an economist who deals with more. He deals with some specific stuff, but he has some interest. He's very libertarian. It was at the Freedom Festival, and he's like a very little person. He's like 3 feet tall, has multiple issues, but he's a really accomplished professor. And I spoke to him, and he agreed to talk to me. That was a few months ago, but I might hit him up when I'm down there and see if I can get an interview with him, because he has some ideas about like handicapped culture. And he would call it something else. I don't remember, but that'll see. Have you seen what Vaush thinks about horses? I can only imagine. I can see why Vaush hates libertarians. Clint Russell made Vaush look like Whatifalthist when they debated the Ukraine war. I should look at that. This is like watching two blind kids playing tag. Yeah, but one of them I think has like half eyesight in one eye. Tom Woods, was it Tom Woods? I don't think so. Unfortunately, Vaush comes across reasonable in this video. Yeah, I mean, from this video, man, I got to judge him off this one. He's fine.
That and get
what does this have to do
Tom Woods
with productivity?
Averages,
no, not Tom
Woods.
I know Tom Woods. You're looking at like a total social development, not productivity. If we want to find a model that determines,
did you not hear me? Like the guy I'm talking about is 3 feet tall. He's literally 3 feet tall, and he's not like he has a few other like medical issues. So yeah, you would know who it was. I don't think he's like a famous professor. He did a little talk at Freedom Fest, but I really enjoyed it.
Wages based on productivity, you'd have to have a very specific and very fine-tuned algorithm that you could punch a bunch of pre-existing characteristics into and get an individual's wages. Because otherwise, we're not really talking about productivity. We're talking about like available wealth in a society, and that I agree with. On average, you can.
Yeah, and we can get individuals' wages. It's median income versus average income versus
Anthony, are you from
GDP.
Massachusetts?
And
down here in Connecticut.
The stuff I'm talking about is talking about average income and median income. What I'm talking about is very little relation to gross national GDP.
Wait, how do you? So wait,
no,
how
JC, I wasn't. No. He's like, yeah, it's a huge thing.
Income.
It's easy. You look what.
Okay, I'm going to do that, Mike. I'm going to do more of these like theme streams that are one thing for a long time.
What their productivity
hell yeah,
is.
Anthony.
How?
Fucking
basically
you Irish American too. You one of them. We didn't do it.
How do you measure that?
It differs from society
called
to
us when we went
society.
to a
In
show in
agrarian
Mass.
societies, it's farmland and productivity of said farmland. In industrial societies, it is their productivity
in a modern service economy. How would you even begin?
You would, in a modern service economy, you would
Central Masshole. Fantastic.
So let's say you take Starbucks as a business. You took the total revenue of said Starbucks. You look at the amount of coffees made per individual. You look at the amount of revenue from the Starbucks. You look at how it's cleaned. I know it's imperfect, but once you get averages, all of these things are cleaned up. And technically, Vaush, the train of logic you're operating under basically says science and academia cannot exist.
Wait, but you're proving me right. People the barista gets paid the same amount whether they work a morning shift in a downtown location or the evening shift in a rural location.
Exactly.
That gets 100th the amount of customers. They get paid the same amount as long as they're in the same state. But if you have two people who produce the same,
like, just so you guys know, like, I'm like DMing Rick Diaz right now. If anyone watches Kill Tony, you know who Rick Diaz is. I'm just DMing him on Instagram. We've talked a couple of times now. It's fucking sick.
Over time, according to broader productivity
macro. I thought we were looking at individual.
Look, listen, I've said this before and I will say it again, Nordhugger. I'm not supposed to be here. I should be in Ireland. Like, I just should. I'm sorry. Like, the Protestants, people shouldn't be moving around that much. It creates disorder and division. All right. The Catholics were a destabilizing force on the United States. I don't disagree with that. I can't help it. I'm third generation now. I'm American. Okay. I'm Irish American, but I'm Irish American. It's the type of American I have. But I fully, dude, I agree. Like, I will say I am not supposed to be here. I'm just not. Yeah. You know, way it goes. Productivity is just one metric an economist would use to determine wages across nations. And you know, on this Nordhugger, I look so like I look like I could be Nordic. Like, I go to Minnesota and I look around, I'm like, oh, these whites look like me. Yeah, Rick Diaz is great. But yeah, but I'm not Nordic. I think I've told some of you, you can be joking. I'm not joking. I've said this in other videos. I am not supposed to be here as an Irish American. Like, I'm like 75% blood Irish. I should be over there being Catholic with the bog people. Okay. But I'm here and I'm American now, living in an Anglo country, speaking English. So, you know, we adapt.
Macro. Then
you
we're not
divide up global productivity stats and then put it on individuals. Like, I'm not going to educate you for an hour and a half.
No, this is exactly the problem. There's no way to determine productivity empirically when looking at individual statistics, because all you can defer to is broader economic trends.
I'll send you all this stuff on Twitter.
He said it again.
I'm not going to waste the audience's time for an hour talking about this.
Feel free to. So the point that
I'd like to move on to another question.
Oh, I didn't even get to why it was racist, but yeah, okay.
Okay. In my video,
when you're not with your ethnic group.
Since communism has,
I think you're right.
Since communism has failed on every single continent in every single civilization, and
Mike, I mean, there was a lot of movement within that area, within what the Irish would not want you to call the British Isles, but that's what it's known as. So, I mean, you could, like, the ethnicity kind of blends quite a bit there.
And why do you consider yourself an anarcho-syndicalist and basing your theories upon a theory of the world that doesn't seem to have matched up to scientific standards?
What scientific standards have my personal beliefs not matched up to?
Okay, that's fair enough. I mean, I'm not you, Vaush. I don't know your life, but
I mean,
why would you push this view upon the world?
Well, for a number of reasons. Obviously,
like the video, please. I would appreciate it.
Sorry to cut you off, but I have a final question. How would an anarchist state manage a war with an external power or manage a financial crash? Actually, no. How would an anarchist state manage a war with an external foreign power? Let's say your anarchist France and Germany invades. How do you get a military together and negotiate a foreign policy?
I don't think anarchism can survive outside of a global model. I don't advocate for it unless you're in some kind of hypothetical.
And why would a global model exist?
Well, if the world was ready to move to anarchism, I consider this a highly idyllic progression. Because I
mean, he's even admitting it's basically theoretical with what he's saying. So he's kind of like saying, like, dude, it doesn't matter. It's theoretical.
I think that anarchism is the logical end state of a series of pre-existing social, economic, and political factors.
And that is a fine argument
in and of themselves. And then ideally, after those have sort of fermented across the world, you would have an opportunity.
Dude, JC is so right. He asked a basic question. Okay, that's fair enough. Any amount of pushback, and he had nothing to say.
Anarchism, but I consider that a very distant, like that's very much like a rapture moment, ye off in the distance. Until then, I care mostly about the advocacy of anarchist principles. If the society is a bit out of reach for now.
So, what would examples of anarchist
Hungary as
policies
well,
you push be?
which is the other quarter.
Policies I push. Oh, okay, a little bit of a contradiction.
Yes, I would like to have children. I need to find a woman first. Trying my best. We'll see.
There, but I get what you mean. Of course, you work
So
within
how
the
would how would
systems.
okay?
No, policies in line with anarchist political beliefs.
Yes,
Yeah.
You as Vaush, as an individual, what are policies that you think will lead us towards said anarchist utopia?
Dude, he doesn't even want to talk about
You're
this.
putting a big weight on my shoulders here.
I mean, you're a political thinker. It's your job.
Well, yeah, though legislating anarchism is definitely a tall order. But so a couple of things. Obviously, I think taxes should be higher.
Mike, I love
think
Hungary as well.
Fruits of those taxation, should be
Here's
put
where we
towards
start
a welfare
disagreeing with
state. I think that severe regulatory penalties can be placed on the financial markets and higher specific taxes on the wealthy, on capital gains.
Okay.
And I think a sort of financial
I want to have kids.
into market socialism.
I mean, I was living with my girlfriend. I mean, we just broke up like a month ago. So, I'm 28. I want to have kids by 30, but that's probably not going to happen. But, as soon as I can, I'm going to fill the damn SUV.
Would be something that I find ideal, with the idea being you eliminate the bourgeois as a class, you ensure that industry is controlled collectively by the proletariat, nationalize a few industries. I can think of a few that could do for a little bit of a takeover, that kind of stuff. And, it'd be very complicated long term. Such as
chat.
What industries would you like to nationalize?
The pharmaceutical industry is a big one. I think you can make a really strong argument.
Honestly, I agree with that.
Okay.
I think government should control health.
And also a massive takeover of local transit.
I agree with that.
Okay,
Actually,
train
I agree with
build.
it in some states, not others, because you see varying different attitudes towards government takeovers depending
He
on
wants
the society,
anarchism, but wants to
where
give
in,
the
like,
government more
Sweden or South
taxes
Korea,
and
it goes
control
very well,
of
but in Italy or
health.
in Brazil, it goes terribly.
Oh.
So I'm from Philadelphia. Whatever the government controls is just, it doesn't work. But in Minnesota or Massachusetts, I'd support it.
I'll make the trains run on time. I'm well and train pilled. The energy industry will get that one. Stuff
Isn't
like
that
that.
like isn't one like r/neoliberal obsessed with trains?
Yeah, but we don't accept them. The lefties are more obsessed with trains. We like it more. Trains are good. I like trains, and
I have stuff to say about leftists, but I hate neoliberals. And I don't like neocons either, but I hate neoliberals. Like, look, if you're a leftist and that's what you believe, I disagree with you, but I can at least see where you're coming from and like, oh, you're ideological, whatever. Neoliberals are just lying to themselves about wanting to like just get all the money and shit, man. Yeah. I'm with you, Nordhugger.
An end to car dependency would be an ideal. My housing, my basic
Only
goal
one of
would
them
be
thinks it'll
nationalize
end in
industries that have inelastic
anarchism.
demand and worker control for everything else, and unions for workers within government enterprises, which of course cannot be controlled by the workers because they're ostensibly controlled by the people.
I don't think unions are controlled by the people. In Philadelphia, the union controls the city, and it literally like
unions
beats
are
up
their own
its opponents, and it's led the city to have a smaller population today than it did in 1950.
No, I mean the government's
any
controlled by the
social
people.
group, and I think that's a problem with leftists, where leftists will say we need to concentrate power in good people, but once you say we're going to concentrate power in good people, bad people start showing up because they get the label good.
No, I mean the government's controlled by the people. The union's only ever controlled by the workers.
Is the government controlled by the people?
I said ostensibly,
Give me a country where you could say America.
You said
but
ostensibly.
How do you factor that in with the vast majority of governments across history being autocracies run by a kind of ruling class, like a nobility, like a secret police, like a priest class? And how do you do that with every single
passport,
leftist
bro?
country?
Maybe I should.
With the exception of countries like Sweden per se.
What leftist countries?
Almost every leftist country.
Name one.
Does end up autocratic.
Like which?
So why would giving the government more power mean?
Just answer this question. The Soviet Union, Venezuela, all of them. North Korea, China, all of them. I mean, a lot of them were autocratic in the first place, though.
Is being in the hands of the people.
Well, like what am I being compared here?
You're being compared to every single Tell me what you are. Tell me
Sometimes.
what country.
They
you'd like
used to be a lot better.
We're on a
Early
social-
20th
I don't
century
want to copy
unions were
any
good.
countries.
They've
I'm
kind
not
of
even
been
a
co-opted.
statist.
If
But
you're
I don't
not
think there are
copying
any.
countries, then you're shooting in the dark.
No, because we see policies that we know might work, and we can isolate them and take
How
a
do
look
we
at
know
them
they
in
might work?
application.
It's a good point
Because
because we
we
can
can
tell you
isolate
a story.
policies.
Wait,
we still
wait.
have to work within the culture, but
Because you can take a look at isolated policies where
Okay.
they function in a given city or in a given state or in a given district, and you can try to determine the effect they'll have in a broader. And if we end up being a bit experimental, so are the founding fathers. Okay, I am
Yeah.
the apple has not fallen far from the cherry tree.
Which is something I've seen across
Like,
history, where
that's a good
every
thing to
single
say.
state that tries to deviate from a norm of what the pre-established principle is fails. French Revolution killed millions of people.
What
Russian
about
Revolution
us?
killed millions of people.
Not a
Chinese
good
Revolution
argument.
killed millions of people. Taiping Rebellion, which is a Christian fanatical sect in China, third bloody.
That's not really Christian though. It was influenced by this, but it was so different. You can't call that Christian. It was influenced by Christian. They kind of co-opted that in the face. So what happens in a society is that if your society is failing respective to another one, and you can see examples of this, Cassowary's Revenge. I've talked about this example a few times for those that have listened to the podcast in audio. You find that the new culture that is coming in and can be seen as through cultural values as being better than the other one, then those ideas might start influencing. But they're always over like the underlying cultural upbringing of whatever else is going on.
War history. Every single time you try to make a revolution, make
Yes.
a new utopia fails.
What
And
about
revolutions
us?
And the Nordic economies being small countries, oil rich, ethnically homogenous. You see the failure start to happen with immigration that's happening right now. I mean, and they are not leftist countries. They are Catholic. They are capitalist. What's revenge? I don't know.
Succeed are those that work upon pre-existing systems, like the Glorious Revolution in the UK, the American Revolution, Europe, and others. And I'm glad we agree on that.
Wait, all these revolutions were predicated, at least in some respect, off of the society they were built upon.
Yes.
So is everything.
Right.
So
I
is
don't think the
everything.
French Revolution was any more a rejection of the previous principles of its nation
Yes,
than
it
the
was.
American
It-
was for the
It
colonies
was
that it
totally
came
was,
from.
bro. Like they,
So-
in the
It
so-
French
totally was,
Revolution-
bro.
Let me
So was
finish.
America.
The French Revolution
Please let me finish.
outlawed religion. It
Have that
killed
thing on deck.
hundreds of thousands of people. It created total suffrage. It renamed the names of the weak. It killed 5% of the population or the nobility. It took the entire economy into the state's hands in the Revolutionary War. The US Revolution basically just said, you can keep your colonial legislatures, but we're getting rid of England, and we're going to make a really weak central.
All the
Yeah, it wasn't
things the French
aristocratic.
Revolution did were based on Enlightenment principles, which
Yes.
was the ideological history
So
of
was the
that
American
nation.
Revolution.
Yes.
I agree. That's my point. Yeah, I think that these revolutions are just difficult business, and sometimes they succeed and sometimes they don't. But
if
I'm not
every
talking about
that tries to
revolution.
break
I've
from
never
precedent
mentioned
fails,
revolution for my
if you
system.
can trace that back to ancient history, why would you go with that precedent? Why wouldn't you follow the precedents that work?
Neither did. Do you think that they were following a precedent
American
when they
Revolution
became?
followed
Wait,
precedents that
please.
work.
You think they were following a precedent when America like became a democracy? Like, of course not.
Yeah.
Obviously not.
England was a democracy beforehand. All of the local governments kept their power in America.
What's he talking about?
They
Did I just cut the volume out? What just happened?
It was a parliamentary system. They had two separate parties,
Bob
the Whigs
cut
and the
volume off?
Tories. They would alternate power. You had prime
Yeah, he did.
ministers,
I muted him in chat.
all that stuff. Also,
Okay.
got to tell you, I need to run at 9.
I understand. Oh, sorry, I muted myself. My bad. I understand. It was a monarchy.
But it was it's like Britain today, but to a lesser degree. It was a monarchy with a republic, with a monarchy with
A constitutional
it was-
republic
it was
is not
it
a
was monarchy
democracy.
with a democracy
bro.
as well.
It was
The
a-
Americans just couldn't vote and said democracy because the Americans were
Uh.
treated under the British system like they were a subject nation that Britain conquered, like India. But at the same time, the Americans said that they were Englishmen and thus deserved to get voting rights.
they were.
Which is a
It was
liberalism
not a democracy. It was
idea.
a parliamentary monarchy, but
Bro, are we
at
going to
the-
like say the only
Dude, it was a parliamentary monarchy, and this is not semantics. This is a very clear distinction.
Democracy in the world.
There's some spectrum to it, but not in this case. It's too far into one direction, which is towards monarchy.
Their New England town
The
hall,
most
like,
powerful person in England was there by blood. In America, the most powerful person, Washington, was elected, admittedly by white landlords. You know, so
that's not true. 70% of them. Oh, yeah, landowners is accurate for the South,
Yeah,
but in the North, almost everyone could vote. Yeah, but I mean, by that logic, Britain is not a democracy today.
No, because the Queen doesn't have any power now. The function of the government.
The most powerful people in Britain, the people making the most decisions at the time, were prime ministers. Lord North was the guy who Lord North.
I get what he's saying. The prime ministers were not nearly as powerful back then as they are today. And today, I think that the royal family has more power than you might realize, but not as much as back then.
Prime Minister of the Tory party was the guy that masterminded the American Revolutionary War.
The king had enormous power at the time that we left.
Yeah.
No, this is highly tangential.
No, he's wrong is the thing, because a lot of things still needed like the seal, and it wasn't a ceremonial thing. It was a big fucking deal.
Okay, you said you have to leave in 7 minutes.
Then it's an integrated system. It's part democracy, part monarchy. Okay.
So let's try to get to the heart of this. Okay. There was experimentation
that existed. They also pulled in the Greeks and the Romans and several Native American states in the New World.
Sure, and Marx did as well. Marx's theories were derived almost entirely from Hegelian insights following.
But Hegel didn't build a state. Hegel was just some nerd in Germany. Hegel never built an empire. For America, we were building it upon a precedent of pre-existing states.
I'm not talking about state making. I'm only talking about what.
But Marx made a philosophy that people built states off. The Marxist Bible, basically Das Kapital, is them using a philosopher's view to construct an entire civilization.
Okay.
And whenever that happens, it fails.
Okay. I don't think they really did much with Marx's theories to build the USSR.
They literally had classes in the Soviet Union and China. I have Chinese friends. They studied Marxist texts in school.
And he just cited his friends.
Lenin.
They didn't apply them
when he made decisions.
Trust me, I know enough about the Soviet Union to know that it's about as communist as Nazi Germany was. I have no respect for the Soviet Union.
What separates the theory of true communism?
I mean, that he doesn't bother me that much if he says that, bro.
From the Christian.
This idiot is literally an HOI 4 player and thinks you can only change ideology with your focus tree. Holy crap, that is an amazing insult I need to use.
Kingdom of heaven.
Because you can take a look at what the USSR was doing, and none of it had anything to do with the political. Why do you interrupt?
Real Inquisition.
Everything.
Why can't you say real fascism hasn't been tried by that logic?
Wait, no, hold on. Because when fascists say, I want X to happen, and then you look at Nazi Germany, that happened. When you take a look at what Marx said he wanted to happen, and then look at the USSR, none of it happened. Nothing. Literally nothing. There's no relation.
Now, hold on a minute, because Marx is like the philosopher behind it. Marx didn't say a lot of like how he wanted things to happen. He just brought a theoretical framework that was applied to other people. You can't compare that. When you look at what Mussolini and fascist leaders and the painter, they say stuff and then they implement it. That's different, but you have to compare that to the leaders of the Bolshevik Revolution. So this isn't a great argument, but I assume Whatifalthist is not going to realize that.
Again, you can do this No True Scotsman all you want, and I agree.
He's not.
Okay, there are always thresholds, fine lines you can draw, but no, I don't own up to any of that. You take a look at Marxist theory, and then you take a look at the USSR. No relationship at all.
Let me break this down.
Let me break this down. You break down
forms. It's been tried with Bolivarian communism in South America. It's been tried under Castro, which was very independent from the Soviet Union.
You know, for a person who claims to be an intellectual, you sure do like going on like bumper sticker tangents.
It's been tried under a Marxist Trotskyite version. There's third world socialism, which took over a majority.
Wait, I have to ask sincerely. Given we have so little time to talk, is there a reason why you're filibustering?
They were reading Marx and then reading this text.
Dude, he is filibustering.
Treating it as a Bible and then trying their own thing.
Whatifalthist? I have to ask: are you filibustering because you have 4 minutes left?
Are impossible.
So What if?
Let me just finish. Let me finish one.
No, wait. We're 4 minutes till you have to go, which you announced 3 minutes ago, and you're filibustering with something that has nothing to do with anything I've talked about. This has been your response to every point you don't have an answer to. You run off to the next thing, or you say indignantly.
Yourself, bro.
You sound indignantly like, "Well, I've already answered that by not answering it." You're not engaging with the thing that I'm saying.
This is all stuff you've done in your past debates, bro.
Past debates? Come on. You can't be mad about how this one is going. So pretend that you have some kind of history of my behavior to call upon. We talked through in second wave the manner which you're not able to describe.
I describe it as a philosophy based off the combination of the Frankfurt and the postmodernist school.
What's wrong with postmodernism?
That is built upon the theory that power is the ultimate relationship of power is the ultimate relationship inside human societies, and the purpose of a society is to fight against said oppression, and that we should structure our civilization around combating the oppression that comes.
Do you like fighting oppression?
And built upon the theory that there are no social relationships outside power.
Don't you think that we should fight oppression? And also, they don't claim there are no social relations outside power.
I think we should be critical and intelligent about it, rather than just trying to slide everyone into a black or white worldview based on whether or not they fight
overuse of abstract arguments.
You think postmodernism, the philosophy around believing there's no objective truth or narrative, slides people into black or white sides? Isn't that mutually contradictory?
That's obvious to anyone who's looking at this.
Wait, so it's an ideology which rejects empirical truth and encourages a multifaceted approach towards social analysis. But also, you think
the people who would say the people who say, look, the way people often work is that they put on a facade.
All right, what are we putting up next?
And social justice did that.
They got me with that one.
It put on a facade of what its dominant. They put on a facade, and then through that facade, it basically allowed itself to do the exact opposite.
They've duped
because they thought they were rid of it, and that's the case with all humans. We all need to achieve balance, and so when we say one thing too loudly, we're probably going to end up doing the other. I need to get going, but do you have any last statements, man?
So they do one thing, but then the other, and their ideology says one thing, but they act the other way because source trust me, and because they're two-faced.
Yeah.
So your response.
I agree with you, answer, so I can't give you a good answer.
The theory of postmodernism is that they're lying.
You would need to break that down, but I don't have time. So take care.
All right. Have a good one.
Day. Bye.
Holy shit! That was so much more insufferable than I thought it was going to be.
Oh, that was.
Oh my god!
I'm glad I didn't have to sit through that.
I can't believe. Oh my fucking god! That conversation was incomplete. That dude has nothing to do right now, by the way. 0% chance that guy has this appointment that he has, which he informed me of 9 minutes ago, on the hour he has something to do. No shot. Yeah. God damn. I can't believe he was like, there's no way that the abolitionist movement, the civil rights movement, and BLM can be part of the same ideological tradition, because that is the
only thing they talked about in Whatifalthist is just wrong.
That abolitionist era Southern Republicans who are pro-Western expansion set up schools that informed modern teachers. Like, what? What? Do you want to finalize how he's racist? We didn't really get to it, but we're not going to really have a convo with somebody like that anyway, and get to anything. The basic gist of it is that people like him will justify American economic supremacy by arguing that poorer countries are less productive, and they'll define productivity as how much wealth they produce, which is obviously cyclical. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
a widget produced
right
in the
about
US.
that. Okay, so let's. I'm going to ask in the comments in a second, give you a few options on what we want to do next. But what I really want to do is watch what came after this. Where is it? I thought it was over here. His response. Maybe it was back. Wait, was that one on Whatifalthist channel?
Settling the Western frontier.
Huh?
The Frankfurt School.
Oh, yeah. This is the same video. Sorry, guys. I should have had this already pulled up. I thought I did. Because I thought it was right there. But Whatifalthist Cope was the name of the video. More Yeah, so let's Vaush.
The YouTube
Okay, I actually just want to see his
channel that is responsible about the crack pipe. The video for the quote unquote line about the crack pipe. Yeah, and that made the crack actually have was what if
where's his response?
have
I'm
a book?
sorry.
Now, obviously, even in a way where like they're interested, but like they now clearly think they're an expert.
Okay, whatever. We'll just go to something else. You guys want to do 5 countries that will collapse by 2040, or the coming psychological Black Death, or the anthropology of real life NPCs? Oh yeah, I think it was the same thing. Real life NPCs, or will America have its own French Revolution? Jesus, I'm doing a lot of what if alt hiss. We're 2 hours 40 minutes away or in, but let's just keep it going. Okay, this one will be do it. Every available neoliberal metric. The last one, French Revolution. Okay, we're switching it. We're gonna switch it since you're the only one that answered. French Revolution. If anyone wants to go back to the other one, we'll do it next.
A lot of other
Let me know in
folks
the
do
comments.
the same. I've been involved with or created around 6 different social clubs over my life. Sometimes it works, other times it doesn't. I like doing it since it's fun to bring people together and see what happens. However, one of the lessons I've learned is how shocking it can be that you can take different social types of people, put them in the same room, have them see the exact same event, and they'll come out of it with completely different understandings of what just occurred. I was part of a club for talented young people, and I helped form another one for influencers in Los Angeles. I was part of 2 clubs for based intellectuals. The thing that shocked me is that in the first 2 clubs, including one...
Wait. He said I was part of 2 clubs for based intellectuals. Like, look, I get that I would call somebody a based intellectual, like kind of tongue in cheek, like, but I would never describe myself as a based intellectual. I would never describe myself as an intellectual in general. That's crazy. But he just said it with no irony.
For successful young people, or the people who should be ideally positioned to be leaders and understand the society's problems on the best level, is that when we talk about the outside world, it seems like we were living in completely different realities. I'm 22, and I think in some ways that gives me an interesting perspective. For my whole life, I've gotten the impression that most people are poor and struggling, that radical ideologues run most of society's institutions, that China, not Russia, is America's greatest rival, that digitization is spread to every aspect of life, and that...
JC says the illegitimate scholar community is a based intellectual club. I agree with you. I'm with you on that one. Hell yeah, brother. We have more weaponized autism than anywhere else. We have the most concentrated weaponized autism in our group, in the IS community, as anywhere else in the world. I challenge you to find some place with more weaponized autism at greater rates. You can't do it.
Most young men are screwed with dating. These have just been obvious to me for my whole life since they're the only things I know. However, for older folks who've lived through better times and who often don't want to see the changes I'm talking about, I'm often shocked at how they'll deny things that have just been obvious for my entire life. In some ways, it's not an age thing.
Other people don't think like me. That's weird.
Since I'll talk to the successful young people or LA influencer types, and I'll be in complete shock at their inability to realize how ugly things are out there and how siloed they are inside their own little communities. I'll tell an influencer girl what a basic male perspective on dating is, or someone from New York City about Pennsylvania's horrible deindustrialization, and I'll be in complete shock that these sort of things have never crossed their minds. This video comes from my realization of the profound myopia and disconnect from reality that much of our society has.
Myopia.
And I keep always circling back to one historical example, the French Revolution. The only thing I can think of that connects this well to the foolishness of our era is when Marie Antoinette apocryphally said, "Let them eat cake" to starving French peasants.
My God, he didn't even say that. It's a mistranslation from 400 years ago. He should know this.
I think modern America has a series of incredible similarities with this that we'll investigate through this video. When I see modern society and drive around, I see a giant gaping hole with a vacuum inside it that's sucking out our society, and no one wants to look at it.
Do an ad. Yep.
I don't think most people today realize how hard their lives are. Most people just believe whatever they have to get to the next day, and I really don't fault them for that. Life's really hard, and you gotta do what you gotta do. On top of this, almost no one knows enough about history or human nature to be able to compare our era to anything else. As I like to say, we're fish in a pond that have never seen the outside world, and we don't know what makes our era special. However, I believe that if people realized how hard their lives were, that everything else would fall apart, which is coincidentally what I think is going to happen. Modernity holds itself on a very high horse for having a higher standard of material living to previous eras. However, the average person in America's standard of living has dropped precipitously in the last 50 or so years. The average American lives in what really amounts to poverty today. Half of Americans live hand to mouth now with no savings at all.
This is under a changed definition of poverty. It's very consumerist based. I mean, people are not doing well. I get it, but it's a different thing than the absolute poverty of the past.
2/3 of Americans can't even pay a $400 emergency cost, meaning some minor life crisis could push them over the edge. I once asked my Twitter following how they paid their bills. I make decent money, but I've seen the cost of basic life stuff go up, and I calculated my costs and wondered how normal people just made it. The responses on Twitter were eye-opening. Lots of people said they didn't heat their homes in the winter. They never ate out, didn't eat meat, worked multiple jobs, and all that kind of thing. This is the sort of thing working-class friends have told me has become normal. The thing that blows my mind is that this was not the life that we were promised. Our society is Fight Club so presciently.
No, it's not the life we were promised. It's the life that your neoliberal ideology or neocon, whatever, two sides of the same coin, created Whatifalthist, and you seem incapable of realizing that.
Told us we'd all be rich celebrities if only we worked hard and followed our dreams. The pain is so much more acute given people go on a social media every day and see ludicrous wealth which they will never get. A survey from a couple years ago found the average American worked an 11-hour day. And I guess the numbers are higher now. When I deal with service people like my plumber, Uber driver, therapist, electrician, I see that this has become large.
Oh my God, he doesn't understand how much money a freaking electrician makes at all. From each according to his ability to each according to his needs.
Normal from the hours they work. Even college students who should ideally be having fun are working much more than they used to. There's a great book named The Economics of Discontent by Jean-Michel Paul, and it goes through this whole process of how the average person's life has gotten worse. And there's a lot of eye-opening stuff where it's perfectly normal for young Americans to spend a majority of their income on rent. And it's normal for people in the lower half of the economic chain to have debt, which pushes everyone to subsistence level. One of the things that's really shocking is how working Saturdays has become normal. When I was growing up, the weekends were sacred. But recently, whenever I deal with people, I consistently find that most people, even if indirectly with college students doing stuff like studying, work what really amounts to a 12-hour day, 6 days a week. It blows my mind that this is not a topic of national discussion and that the population's living through Victorian work conditions. And I think it's since people have too much pride to admit how poorly off they are. Throw on top of this how many people are in crippling debt, especially from stuff like college tuitions or paying medical bills, and you see an economically desperate population. I've explained the reason for this decline in standard of living in many previous videos. But the short answer is that this is a very common historic process caused by an overabundance of labor, which stems in our era from the combination of population growth, women's entrance to the workforce, immigration, automation, and globalization. These are all complicated issues with both benefits and drawbacks. However, all of them mean that there's a higher supply of labor so that the average American lives a...
Like, Whatifalthist is like the zoomer, I think.
Much worse life than before. I always use this example because I think it's easy for us to forget it, but just look at old TV shows and movies. Homer Simpson in the 80s was a lower middle class loser. That was the whole point of the show, and all of that was normal. Homer Simpson in the 80s had 3 kids, a stay-at-home wife, owns a house, and goes on multiple vacations a year, and he's considered a lower middle class loser, and that's basically the point of the show. All of that was normal, and now Homer's grandchildren would be working in conditions much more comparable to their great Victorian grandfather.
Okay. Listen. In the 1800s, they didn't have child labor laws. there were kids getting their hands pulled off, their arms pulled off. This is insane. I mean, this comparison is absolute nonsense. It's almost to the point of disrespectful. I mean, if these were still alive people who had went through this, like company towns were like, in the early 1900s, there were like fights with guns from like the unions fighting for basic rights, like Saturdays off. Like these were hard fought things by, dude. He knows, he's showing pictures of coal miners, child coal miners, and he's like, oh yeah, this is the conditions you're going to be in. No, dude, just because like late stage capitalism kind of sucks and you're sitting around and you have no meaning in life doesn't mean that you're the same as getting black lung as a 10-year-old and having your legs amputated with no orphanages or anywhere to go. Okay, that's not true. Like this. Source, just look on TV. Yeah.
Then to their father in the 80s. Since my background's in history, I often run the thought experiment about if you were to drop someone from a different era of history in the modern world, what would they think? And as a general rule, the modern world values the material world against everything else, while other eras of history put a very strong emphasis upon religion, community, culture, and environment, which we don't. However, if you were to drop someone from any other era of history into our society, they would say that we are failing in all of those categories. In my recent video on mortality, I talk about how humans use religion, community, family, and shared culture to offset economic hardship. But none of those exist anymore. Yeah. Religion has declined precipitously, meaning there's no shared value system today or anything to draw meaning from. Religious people are significantly happier than non-religious people to a degree that roughly equals out to $15,000 a year. There's not a single successful agnostic society in history. Religion creates a way to conceptualize reality and deal with the pain and chaos of a terrifying world. Without it, we're completely lost, and this is a big cause for the almost universal nihilism among young people. A couple of days ago, I looked up why is modern society so nihilistic. In the entire first page.
Okay, last time I got to go to the bathroom. Quick one. Don't pee. Well, maybe not the last time. Oh, more people came up. Okay. I'll be back. He's pulling in alt history, running away. Yes.
Page of results was saying how nihilism is great, and it's amazing and so liberating that we believe in nothing. People often think religion and science are at odds, but the reality is that they play into each other. The reason the West prides rationality is since Christianity does, and as Christianity's gotten weaker, science has declined in the West. It's not a coincidence America is both the most technologically advanced and religious society in the Western world. Communities have completely collapsed. People don't even have a concept of community. My friend Greg asked people what a community is, and they consistently got the definition wrong. People just see themselves as a person who lives somewhere and works somewhere. The idea that almost all humans had over history of having a family and tribe of people who they knew for their whole lives and who would back them is completely lost. The amount of friendships have collapsed by an incredible amount, with around 20% of Americans are the largest group having no friends. Studies have consistently found that interpersonal relationships are the biggest factors in long-term happiness,
Also, if you say it every once in a while, it makes a little animation come up, I think. I don't know if it does it right now, but like if I say like and subscribe, does it do that? It should. Maybe it just does that, not on the live videos. I don't know.
As well as being one of the most important factors for physical health. Being lonely is the health equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Most people don't know their neighbors anymore. People feel completely isolated and like their lives don't matter at all. I've repeatedly mentioned in previous videos how family is one of the most important factors for how society works.
That's a good one.
How you can use family structure to predict political ideology and social structure. Due to a combination of birth control and the breakdown of religion, the traditional family no longer exists. The norm has been for broken families among the lower and middle classes. My best friend's from a working class background and grew up in a plurality white working class community, and he basically knew no families that had two parents together or where the parents weren't doing drugs. Among the more upper social classes, divorce is incredibly common. Almost no young people can afford to have kids. For the first time in history, most people age 30 are childless. Over the historic record, when the average age of marriage gets above 28, you're gonna have a revolution or major political crisis, since humans are biologically of young men under the age of 30 are virgectory lonely spinsters for their whole lives. We'll get back to this later in the video, but this sexual depression, which I talk about in this video.
But this is key right here, whatever this article is. Single men are lonely, but single women are empowered. Yeah, that's a problem. And you wonder why men go to like East Asia and stuff.
We'll get back to this later in the video, but this sexual depression, which I talk about in this video, is the biggest factor driving revolution today. For young men, sexual frustration is like a tea kettle, and if it isn't directed towards women, it will cause wars and violence. I don't think anyone really understands how dangerous this crisis is for society. On top of this, the sexual dynamic is destroyed by social engineering on part of the left. Young women often act in incredibly irresponsible and entitled ways, given in this culture, if you criticize a woman for anything, you'll be called sexist. And society...
He's so much of just anecdotal takes. Who cares?
Tells women to project all their anxieties and problems onto the patriarchy. Implicit in the belief that women are perfect, which modern society believes, it results in, if there are any problems in your life, there must be someone else's fault, and thus men's.
That is the major problem. We do have that going on.
Fault. At the same time, it gives young men no direction in life, thus resulting in few developing their masculinity in healthy ways, creating a class.
Well, they don't promote masculinity at all. They say toxic masculinity, but they say anything that's masculine is toxic in practicality, at least the way that I see it.
Class of cold, sociopathic, effeminate, or downright creepy young men. I'm going to cut this segment short since I don't want to rehash ideas I've covered in old videos, but you struggle to find a single institution that works well and properly in modern America. The universities have become ideological indoctrination centers. Healthcare is going to tape.
Dude, he just gave a bunch of data, didn't give a lot of commentary on it, and then just said a bunch more things. Like he's not connecting his data to what he's saying, which is a little
we're consuming the whole society's finances. The court systems are biased towards.
Seriously, he is being entitled from the other side. He's recognizing some real problems, but I totally agree with that.
The rich and women. Every form of media has been co-opted by radical leftists. Yeah. Congress doesn't pass laws. The dating apps don't get people into relationships, and social media leaves people lonely. Our society has tried to substitute real things like community or natural food for fake things that are worse quality, like social media or fast food. This leaves a hollow society that doesn't function. This is a lot like the French Revolution, given in both cases, the average person was pushed into poverty, with no opportunity to raise a family, and with every aspect of their culture barely functioning. The only people winning were a very small amount of the very rich, and even they had to deal with the effects of living in a failed society. The system in France didn't work for anyone. The monarchy was broke, the nobility and church felt conned of any real power. The merchant classes felt like they were screwed over by the nobility. Both the nobility and merchants wanted France to be a parliamentary democracy. The peasants were starving. It's much like America, where both sides of the political spectrum and every interest group feels like they've gotten the rotten end of the deal. And long story short, the system is so broken that no one has any incentive to keep it running, which then creates the revolution. I've mentioned this in many other videos, though I'll keep it short. However, the reason I made this video is from Peter Turchin's computer models. Turchin is a scientist who's compiled data for when countries have revolutions and found it's pretty easy to predict and is controlled by two variables, those being inequality and median wages. He's been able to use that data to predict when countries in history had revolutions to the point of the exact years they took place in. His computer model predicted the French Revolution, the Roman Civil Wars, the Russian Revolution, and the Black Death. This is some videos I've made to cover this topic in some greater depth. As I've explained before, these secular cycles have occurred every 200 or so years for as long as we have records. And
I mean, like, world crises I found. Okay. Collapse of Franks, Abbasids. I don't know. These would be hard.
Always break the previous era of history, ushering in a new one. The terrifying thing is that 15 years ago, his computer model showed America had all the variables lined up for a crisis like this. He predicted at the time that the 2020s would be a very rough decade in America. The scary thing is that the reality has exactly lined up with this. From all these points above, I hope I can show how all the variables line up on a material basis for America having its own political crisis on the scale of the French Revolution. It isn't just possible, it's likely. Before we continue with this video, please humor me for a second for a shameless plug. You all should check out my podcast, Common Ground, which I put on a separate YouTube channel so that it didn't mess up the algorithm on this main channel. And we cover what I believe to be some of the most interesting conversations you can find in podcasts. And we have really cool guests, such as the Libertarian presidential candidate, the CEO of one of the largest geopolitics consulting. Marie Antoinette probably never said, "Let them eat cake." However, the reason—
Didn't he just say it in another video?
That myth has caught on and stood the test of time is that it's indicative of an elite that is so detached from reality that it is completely incapable of seeing what's actually going on. There's a real difference in having rulers that understand your problems and just don't care.
I completely agree with this point right here, Mike. 100%. And I think that that's a real problem. And I've tried to. I'm going to do an episode eventually where I compare like mating, dating rituals, and that's important. It really is. I mean, like, you know,
in those who can't even mentally process it. This is something that has occurred in many eras of history, but is also true today. The class's detachment of our current elite always shocks me. At the same time, their complete inability to comprehend the problems that affect most Americans is incredible. It feels in modern America as if we have a reality war in which different parts of the population cannot even agree upon the most basic facts. On top of this, their inability to see their complete weakness and impotence is really shocking. That might not be pleasant for some people to hear, but every major conservative public figure, whether Donald Trump, Jordan Peterson, or Andrew Tate, have had literal legal action taken against them, yet there's no equivalent on the left. A horrifying thing that I recently heard is debanking, where Nigel Farage, the guy that pushed Brexit, which, by the way, is not really that radical, had his bank kick him out and 9 other banks refused to work for him. You can't publicly say trans people biologically don't exist, or white people have done the vast majority of inventions in the modern world, but if you say kill—
You just said it. So you can, right?
All white people, you won't be fired from a prestigious journalism job. You can rebel and form an independent state without consequences. The trans movement went from an invention to being law over a period of 10 years. You can see the extreme anti-hate speech laws over much of the West being demonstrative of a leftist elite. An example that we have a leftist elite is—
But a leftist elite is not leftist. This is just using these stupid, like, a leftist elite is now the new conservative. Because these are relative terms. People talk about this so weird. I need to do a video on that.
That Donald Trump was controversial. Meanwhile, the left has made much more social gains in that time, but none of the actions the left has done is controversial. And controversy always demonstrates who's in power because it demonstrates what the cultural consensus is. The left runs the largest corporations, the government, the media, bureaucracy, a large share of religious and military organizations, Hollywood, the educational system, academia, and basically every other institution in society. These aren't moderate left-wingers either, but rather ones who want to destroy the current civilization and believe that every single element of the society should be based around them. If you disagree with the left in many cases, you'll lose your job, have your home doxxed, and maybe even face physical violence. One of the lessons I've learned is that it's more important to see what someone doesn't say than what they do. Oftentimes when someone screams a certain message, it's just a way to take attention off from something else they're doing. That is clearly the case with the modern elite. Almost no one really stands against minority, sexual, or other identities, which is why the left has been able to be so successful since there's not really any opposition. However, the left has turned this into being the only issue that can be discussed in society today. I remember when I was in college, my professor asked me how my essay on Arthurian literature related back to oppression, since every single thing we wrote in that class had to relate back to oppression somehow. Look at how every piece of media, movie, university class, and more has to be built off the left's agenda today. However, this obsession is partially a trick by the elite to take the focus off the problems that are destroying the lives of the average American.
Wait, the elite merely uses leftist guys. I cannot believe I'm watching 3 hours of these videos. Holy crap. Has anyone been here the whole time? No one has been here for a long time. I wonder where Frenchie is. He's in whatever. Okay. And tolerates them as a way to get power over society and shun attention away from the declining standard of living and class issues. Yeah, I mean, every country's elite does this in different ways. Ours does it this way, but I think it's wrong to call them leftists. I think we should understand that they are essentially the conservatives at this point. And people perceived as conservative in a situation where the institutions are held by people you're calling leftists. It's really the leftists that are the conservatives at that point.
Or the ones discussed before.
Just depends on how you
Social
define
shaming is thrown around even for causes that have nothing to do with oppression. Being against free trade, globalization, completely open immigration will all make you tarred and feathered as a racist and nationalist. However, those are things that hurt the working class by lowering the value of labor. The great irony is that for this criticism of modern society, I will almost certainly be called a bigot with no analysis of the ideas I'm discussing, since the left is completely incapable of realizing its own failings or taking any criticism. They're kind of doomed because they can't change strategies for the real world.
No, I mean, I like Whatifalthist. Like, he's inspired me a lot, and I agree with a lot of what he says. I don't like a lot of what he does. So, I mean, to relate with Whatifalthist, I guess I don't know what you mean, but I certainly don't like hate him or anything. Generally, I quite like alt. Yeah, exactly. So I like him. I mean, he is cringe. He is cringe as well. So I'm making fun of him, but it's not like I don't dislike him. I'd rather hang out with him than Vaush, probably.
As I've said many times before, and as explained through this text wall,
no enemies on the right. Okay.
All of the left's positions benefit the college educated and give them more jobs or power. By hurting the working classes, it lowers the cost of living for the college educated. It's remarkable how leftist positions move from being for the working classes decades ago to openly disdating them. Look at the discourse on the left at the right today. They say right-wingers are all racist and working class people. They literally view the majority populations of their countries with horrific condescension. An easy example of the elitism and classism hiding behind the left is how all the major corporations have aligned with the left. To be a left-winger today involves constantly supporting the largest corporations in the world, while saying the majority populations of countries are racist, too traditional, and doing everything wrong, if only the experts came in to teach them what's correct. It's really shocking how disconnected left-wingers are from the issues I've mentioned before. One of the things that always gets to me is that if you mention the sexual problems young men have today, left-wingers will reflexively call you an incel.
Yeah. Just so you know, left and right. Oh my God, he's going to talk about him. Holy crap. I remember him doing something I said. To your point, left and right are increasingly meaningless. I mean, left and right were based on the sides that people sat on during the French Revolution, I think. I'm pretty sure I remember that. So if that's not the case, then, or if that's true, it's like the farther away you get from that, the more meaningless they mean. I'm looking at it from a simple perspective of the power, and then like the current power structure, and then whatever is trying to become the current power structure.
Problems young men have today, left-wingers will reflexively call you an incel. First of all, that's objectively not true in my case, but on top of that,
wait a minute. He basically just said, I have sex for real, is what he said.
Is that if you mention the sexual problems young men have today, left-wingers will reflexively call you an incel. First of all, that's objectively not.
This is a photo of me.
Not true in my case, but on top.
He's laughing while he's saying that he's not a virgin.
of that, if the majority of your young male population is sexually frustrated and single, you should at least worry about that for your own self-preservation so your society doesn't fall apart and have a revolution. It's impossible to talk about the struggles young men or the working classes face today, given that both go against the sexual and racial agendas, which have suddenly become the only lenses you can view or talk about in the world today. A great irony is that I get a lot of comments from old school Marxists or communists who say, yeah, I agree with your criticisms of the new social justice left, that they don't care at all about the working classes and are completely delusional. I've covered this whole topic in greater depth in this video, but the left-wing elite has given young men absolutely no reason to work with them. The crazy thing is that no one in the ruling class seems to realize how much danger they're in. If I were to tell them about the problems here, they just look at me blankly. One of the logical conclusions I'm completely shocked no one else has reached is that if you tell...
He does have incel energy. He does have that type of energy. Yeah.
Young men or white people, yeah, you're evil and oppressive or racist or sexist, no matter what you do. The next logical conclusion is, I don't give a damn what you think. I'm just going to be racist and sexist. And I can't understand why the left doesn't realize if we're going to push tribalism for minorities who are the smallest tribes, that's not a good endpoint. In short terms, the left's alliance of the bureaucracy, women, sexual, and ethnic minorities has no strong shared strength, given it's an alliance of losers, or the people who didn't get into the previous alliance of power. None of these factions really like each other that much.
The fucking bros.
Except for their hatred of the traditional culture. However, as said before, the left has no military culture and scorns manliness, meaning it will lose any fight. The left is too scared of using force to remove the homeless from city centers, let alone bloodily put down a revolt. Young men have absolutely no reason to fight for the left, and especially those of strong military fiber. The left literally dislikes the idea of aggression, masculinity, planning, social structure, or having standards.
It is funny that they had a dictatorship run by a SoundCloud rapper. That's wild.
As Mao Zedong said, power comes from the muzzle of a gun. And the left thinks owning guns is morally wrong. Modern young left-wingers have a culture that glorifies anxiety, making excuses and weakness. The idea of leftists organizing militarily, actually having a coherent plan and carrying it out is so laughable, even left-wing late-night shows have made jokes about it. When all's said and done, no one will die for the left. Their coalition includes the government bureaucracy, but not the military. Women will not fight, and neither will most LGBT and weak men. The left is literally a coalition of everyone who doesn't want to sacrifice anything for a cause, because one of their dominant moral tenets is permissiveness. The similarity between today and the French Revolution is a completely incompetent elite with no actual force, which at the same time is incredibly arrogant, looks down upon the population, and the actual problems that face them, which will kill their cause. When the French Revolution started, the monarchy was actually incapable of doing anything, and thus lost since the army, merchant classes, peasants, or anyone who could actually use force sided with the rebels, which is where we are today. However, until that point, they could live in their own delusions. Another similarity is that before the French Revolution, the monarchy and nobility were trying to expand their stranglehold over the society. Before the French Revolution, it looked as if the nobility were the way of the future, and laws became more stringent as commoners were excluded from many positions in society. It's similar to how the modern left has been trying to push leftists into every facet of society, only to build up resentment for a reaction that will kill them. This sort of process is normal for these secular cycles. As opportunities shrink and inequality grows, it means that people struggle for fewer good jobs, and thus people try to push their group into power. Hiring policies get sillier, people go to school longer, and you start seeing discrimination, whether by gender or race today, or through the nobility during the L'Ancien regime. At this point, if you want to get a PhD, you have to toe the party line. For corporate hiring, you should be the right race and ethnicity, and in dating, you have to follow loads of things like being over 6 feet tall, making over 6 figures in order to get laid. As this process occurs, it creates...
Dude, why would he say this? Why would he say
hiring, you should be the right race and ethnicity, and in dating, you have to follow loads of things like being over 6 feet tall, making over 6 figures in order to get laid. As this process occurs, it creates politics among the leadership in which only the most docile who agree with the ruling regime get hired, thus resulting in the classic decadent court of idiots
it's not even really
incapable of seeing real problems, which I talk about in this video. However, on top of this, as people with genuine talent get left out without money or power, and the leadership fossilizes, it sets up the society for revolution, which we're going to look at next. There are several different cycles in history. One's generational around 80 to 120 years. There's a bigger one around 200 to 300 years. There's a really big one at 2,100 years. However, part of the reason the parallels to the French Revolution run so close is that for the 200-year cycle, the last time it fully played out was the French Revolution. History has a pendulum that swings back and forth, reacting to the last swing. Me Too and the Cult of the Oppressed is partially a reaction to the Romans in the last cycle, who kept millions of women as sex slaves with no rights. Our era is also partially a reaction to the Nazis in World War I, which we try to reject only to go too far, which will just create the next reaction against that. History is a twisted mirror warping in on itself, in which it partially reflects another era, but it's also broken in a new thing. Our era is a twisted mirror of the French Revolution, since the ideology that won that conflict has since installed itself as the l'Ancien Regime, and now conservatives are the rebels against it. This revolution will be a counter-revolution.
And they're not conservative.
It will show the emptiness of the project of equality, standardization. And
look, if it's a counter-revolution after decades of the other side being in control, it's just a regular revolution. You can call it whatever you want, though. Bros, it's been fun mounted later. Thanks for coming.
Secularism that has ruled the world since
check out the
French Revolution.
audio podcast.
There was a really popular book before the French Revolution named Qu'est-ce que c'est le troisième état? Or what is the third estate? Across European history going back thousands of years, there's been this concept of the three estates, or those who work being the peasants, those who are the nobility and fight, and those who pray and protect the psychology and spirituality of the society, or the priests. However, the world by the time of the French Revolution had changed, and the book wrote about what is the third estate. And it came to the conclusion that the third estate was everything. It made money, could fight in battle, explored, and did scientific innovations. As warfare switched from aristocratic knights on horseback to ranks of musketeers, they no longer needed the nobility for war, and as France, which was the first country in the world to do so, saw the decline in religiosity, they no longer needed the priests. This book was incredibly popular and caught on like wildfire. It was a big spur for the French Revolution, given it allowed people to articulate the thought, wait, why do we need the ruling class? I understand the shift has occurred pretty recently.
Apparently we needed them.
10, 30 years ago, Silicon Valley, Wall Street, and Hollywood are making great innovations. However, as of now, they've become stagnant and bureaucratic. I'll frame it in these terms. What does our ruling class actually add to society that we want? We've already maxed out the benefits for the digital revolution, and the stuff we push for now, like virtual reality, chip implants, genetic engineering, or AI, are viewed by the rest of the population as abominations. I think many Americans would be happy burning AI researchers or genetic engineers on the stake. Academia has become completely ideological. The media
It's always been ideological, just not the way you wanted it to be.
Makes nothing of value, and the economy only benefits the rich. For young, especially white men, they're not being hired anymore due to diversity coordinators. They're currently completely wiped out, and I can't really see any negatives. This leads me to a politically incorrect point. Young men do such a disproportionate amount of everything in a society that they're the equivalent of the third estate during the French Revolution. Young men work the most hours, they do the vast majority of scientific and philosophic breakthroughs, they make the new companies, they wage war, they explore. People cry over how women make 76 cents for every dollar, but they leave out how men build the buildings, roads, companies, science, countries, religions, philosophies, and more, which you really don't see at all with women. This is taboo to say, but of the top 10 wealthiest women in the world, every single one of them got their money through a man, whether through inheriting or marrying into it. If you line up the greatest figures in every field, whether generals, inventors, philosophers, CEOs, or other high leverage effect jobs, any single honest case, the top 10 would be men. I don't say this to put women down, since they have a very important role that modern society completely ignores. Women give life and heart to a society, turning it from an army to a pleasant place worth living. They provide psychological stability and raise the kids. This is the case in every society in history everywhere in the world. So we know that this is biological, not cultural. However, this makes the left's scheme of using women to replace men absolutely insane. The left's push against masculinity in the dating crisis creates a large, agitated young male population that has absolutely no reason not to destroy them. It's hard to believe how much of the modern left hates masculinity. They call all masculinity toxic and shame men for doing nothing wrong by their distorted views of their ancestors. These guys have really nothing to lose. I was talking to a friend of mine who's a baby boomer. We were talking about the conservative movement and whether or not it was racist. I said yes, and he said no. However, as we talked further, we realized that we meant very different things when we were talking about the right. The old right are not going to be the rebels in this revolution. The old
He's talking about, he says the old right, but he shows Reagan. No, dude, you are a neocon. That's Reagan's ideology. You're the new right. That's what you are. Oh my God.
Right, or that which existed before
He's
Trump.
pandering to incels
is first of all largely dead, and most of it's been co-opted by Trump. The old right was fighting a defensive campaign against the left. It lost a lot since it lacked the left's ideological coherency, and on top of that, the old conservatives were what Samuel Francis called beautiful losers, and they're incapable of being as cynical as the left, which spent the post-war period infiltrating every institution of society. Among young people, I see almost no one who supports the old right. I don't hear a lot of praise for Reaganomics or George W. Bush. The new right, which is emerging right now, is something totally...
Actually, you called me an incel, but I did have pity sex with one woman I met off the internet. Like, why would you say, technically, I'm not an incel? Don't you realize that's the most incel crap to say? Like, even if you are a virgin, like, incel energy is totally a different thing. It's like, you know, people use, it's like when people use the word cuck, they don't mean a literal cuck. It's a metaphoric thing. Yeah, I probably just shouldn't have said that.
Really different. I compare it to the Kaiser and the Nazis, in which that they were both conservative, but had completely different.
No, see, it's just a different weird. He didn't even define conservatism, I don't think. Like, Hitler's not conservative because he wasn't conserving anything. It's in the name. Conserve. What was Hitler conserving? He made a whole new thing.
Emphases. This new right is growing so fast in such a palpable way that it's impossible to ignore. This is why we were debating about if the right was racist. For the old right, like George Bush or Reagan, you'd have to go pretty far to call them racist or sexist. Right. If you say that's a privileged thing for me to say, what are you really comparing them to? We are by far the least racist society in history. The Reagan presidency saw a massive rise in women in the workforce, while British neoliberalism was spearheaded by a woman, being Margaret Thatcher. However, the new right I see is much more aggressive. I'm center-right, but I'm frequently called a traitor for saying that I like that women have rights, not saying that Jews are destroying society, or not talking about race and IQ. This right doesn't really exist yet. It's only barely started to manifest with Trump. However, as one of the players of the digital right, I would bet a lot, or thousands of dollars, that it's going to explode massively in the next couple years. There's such a palpable anger and hatred in the rightist youth. I've had to live through this crap, so I know that it's justified to a certain degree, but it still scares me. I hear most young male teenagers treat Andrew Tate as their idol. I go through Instagram and I'll hear random comments under influencer girls saying, "Why aren't you in the kitchen?" This right is moving so fast, dude, and is more extreme every single year and is growing. I know very few.
I can't. I'm done. I don't need to listen to the rest of this take. I can't give you anything on this. It's just bad. This one in particular. Okay, so I'm going to end this in a second. Any questions you have, go in. Please join the Discord. Whatifalthist sounds exactly the very early alt-right. It's just under a weird Zoomer energy. Yeah, I mean, I don't know, man. I don't know about this guy. I do like him, though. But yeah, I'm going to sign off here. Thanks for coming. 3 hours and 20 minutes. I thought I might have made it a little bit longer, but I just cannot do this anymore. So yeah, check out the Discord. I got Patreon up too. I haven't put anything on there in a little bit, but if you want to support me there, go ahead. But I don't, you don't have to. I'm out here trying to grow, do stuff. Join the Discord to talk about it and, talk about it and share stuff. My brain is, I feel like I feel dumber now. I need to go recharge. All right. Later, guys. Later. Nord Hugger. See you later. He has interesting ideas. Yeah, he doesn't really have anything original. I think he's a net positive as a gateway conduit. I agree with you. Again, I like him. He brings up Tate out of nowhere. He does bring up out of nowhere. Okay. Later.